Chapter 481. Mo Xiaoyao looked at him calmly. Ling Taihan could only sigh helplessly. He said seriously, "Didn't you fight with Lei Enchanting a few days ago? The other side wants me to fight with you again. If it weren't for the fact that they couldn't find Mu Qingcang, they would have even asked him to fight with you." "Reason?" Mo Xiaoyao asked. Ling Taihan shook his head and frowned. "I've thought about it a few times these past few days. When you and Lei Enchanting fought, neither of you used your full strength. That's why you both managed to escape unscathed. If you and I really fought, it would have been a lose-lose situation. However, after more than 10 years, I'm still looking forward to sparring with Prince Ding again." More than 10 years ago, Ling Taihan was only a young man in his early 20s. He was in high spirits at that time. Although Genom of Gojosian was famous, he was still much older than them. The only person in the world who could compare to him was Mu Qingcang. Who knew that at that time, the 14-year-old Mo Xiaoyao, dressed in white, would appear on a horse with a sword? Who knew how many people were stunned by the sword competition that year? Although Ling Taihan didn't lose, Ling Taihan didn't think that he would win by a single move against a 14-year-old youth. The result was almost a draw. At that time, Ling Taihan and Mo Xiaoyao agreed to fight again 5 years later. After that, he went into seclusion in the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce. Who knew that after 5 years, the first news he received was that his third brother had recklessly gone to find trouble with Mo Xiaoyao. At the same time, he also learned that Mo Xiaoyao was seriously injured and crippled. At that time, Ling Taihan's feelings were even more complicated than when he had sparred with Mo Xiaoyao. It was as if you had worked hard for 5 years and thought you could finally kill your enemy, only to be told that your enemy had just killed you yesterday. "You really want to fight?" Mo Xiaoyao asked. Ling Taihan laughed and said, "Why not? Or is your body still not fully recovered? In that case, it wouldn't be too late to fight after the falling jade flower was refined. I just forgot to confirm the date of the duel with him." The only reason he accepted the challenge was because he wanted to spar with Mo Xiaoyao. Therefore, the time and place would naturally be decided by him and Mo Xiaoyao. So many years had passed, and the so-called 4 great masters of the world had gone about their own business. There was almost no chance for them to meet, and this made Ling Taihan feel depressed for a long time. He needed to spar with experts of the same level to improve his martial skills. And among them, Mo Xiaoyao was undoubtedly the best opponent. As for Genom of Gojosian, after hearing about the duel between Mo Xiaoyao and Genom of Gojosian, Ling Taihan had already lost interest in his martial arts. Genom of Gojosian's martial arts were clearly still at the level of 10 years ago. If he used his full strength, Ling Taihan felt that he had at least an 80% chance of winning. As soon as he walked into Shenyang's courtyard, he heard the sound of an intense argument. It didn't sound like the usual Shenyang and Dr. Lin who would fight at the slightest disagreement. Instead, it sounded like all sorts of vicious and contemptuous taunts. Even Yi Li, who was standing at the door, couldn't help but twitch her mouth when she heard it. They didn't even enter the room. The two who were like fire and water last time were now united against outsiders. Shenyang sat to one side and leisurely sipped his tea, looking like a distinguished scholar. Dr. Lin was also drinking tea at the side, looking at the people in front of him with disdain. Zhuo Jing, who had brought Leng Liuyu and sickly scholar over, could only persuade them, "Sirs, it was Wang Fei who asked you to take a look at this person." Dr. Lin snorted softly and glanced at Zhuo Jing, saying, "How come this old man doesn't remember saying that I will only listen to your Wang Fei's orders? She said to take a look, so I'll take a look." Shenyang smiled and said, "This one may be receiving a salary from the Prince Ding mansion, but, as a divine doctor with self-respect, this one will definitely not take a look at someone of the same profession." These words were clearly to Dr. Lin's liking. Dr. Lin nodded and said, "Speaking of which, this old man had a nickname in the Jianghu in the past. It was called seeing death but not saving. The meaning is, I won't save those who shouldn't die, and I won't save those who should die." When Dr. Lin first exclaimed that he was going to bed, it was at least 30 years ago. He was older than everyone present. Naturally, they didn't care whether what he said was true or not. Instead, they clearly expressed their position. Sickly scholar kept coughing. It was unknown whether it was because he was angry or because his injuries were too serious. When he finally recovered, he pulled Lung Liuyu and said, "Second sister, let's go." After saying this, his gaze swept over Shenyang and Dr. Lin like it was dipped in poison. He was thinking that when he recovered, he would come back and poison these two old farts to death. Shenyang and Dr. Lin naturally saw his gaze and expression. However, if it was someone else, they might be afraid of Sickly Scholar's superb poison skills and the poison that was difficult to cure. However, these two people could be said to be the top doctors of their time. Unless the Sickly Scholar really had the ability to concoct a poison that had been lost since ancient times, there really weren't many poisons that could scare them. Lung Liuyu was different from Sickly Scholar. She had also heard of Shenyang's name. The Yangwang Chamber of Commerce was a place where all kinds of strange people gathered. Lung Liuyu naturally understood that most of the people with abilities had strange temperaments. She faintly looked at Sickly Scholar and cupped her hands. "Third brother was rude, please forgive the two doctors." Hearing Lung Liuyu's words, Yi Li understood that it was most likely Sickly Scholar who provoked them first. After all, although Shenyang and Dr. Lin quarreled every day, they had never had any disputes with unrelated people. It was impossible for them to make things difficult for someone who came to seek treatment for no reason. Moreover, it was someone she asked to come over. Seeing this, Yi Li was no longer in a hurry to mediate. She leaned against the wall and thought. Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Tihan's friendship was not ordinary, Sickly Scholar probably couldn't kill him. She had to find a chance to teach him a lesson to vent her anger. "Second sister, you don't have to beg these two damn old men. With their little ability, they can't even come up with a prescription. What ability do they have to treat me?" Sickly Scholar said disdainfully. "Shut up." Lung Liuyu frowned and snapped, "One more word and I'll have Big Brother lock you up in the forbidden area and never come out again." Sickly Scholar was startled. Looking at the beautiful and cold woman in black in front of him, a trace of sadness flashed in his eyes. On the other side, Dr. Lin chuckled and said to Sickly Scholar, "You speak as if you were the one who came up with that prescription." The ancient prescription that Shenyang knew of was basically just a legend. In his library, there was only half a prescription and it was a remnant from 1,000 years ago. Not only were the words different, but the names of the herbs were also different. Even the meanings were written differently. Unless he had the complete ancient prescription, he really didn't believe that this strange kid in front of him could figure out the prescription himself. Sickly Scholar smiled coldly and kept silent. So what if he didn't come up with it himself? He was lucky enough to get the complete ancient prescription, so he won. If these people wanted to know the ancient prescription, wouldn't they have to beg him? "Mr. Shen, Master, what's going on?" Seeing that the argument inside was about to end, Yi Li walked out and asked with a smile as she looked at the people in front of her. Zhuo Jing walked forward and told Yi Li what had happened. This Sickly Scholar was really asking for a beating. It was probably because he hadn't been able to vent his anger in the parlor earlier and had vented it on Shenyang and Dr. Lin. But which one of these two people was easy to get along with? Sickly Scholar almost spat out blood after hearing this. Shenyang smiled and didn't say anything. Dr. Lin wasn't so polite and snorted, "Where did you find such a vicious and sickly person? He's about to die and he still doesn't know his place." Yi Li raised her eyebrows slightly and looked at Sickly Scholar and Lung Liuyu. As long as she saw Sickly Scholar, he would always look sickly. So even after being hit by Mo Xiaoyao, he still looked sickly and didn't look like he was about to die. It was Lung Liuyu who frowned and looked worriedly at her adopted brother. "My adopted brother doesn't know any better and has offended the two of you. I hope the two of you can save his life on account of his youth and ignorance." Chapter 482. Dr. Lin narrowed his eyes at Lung Liuyu and said, "You're more honest than that girl, but your brother, he's so mischievous. He clearly needs to be taught a lesson. It's better to kill him." Dr. Lin was still brooding over the fact that Yi Li had lied to him. Yi Li smiled bitterly in her heart. Lung Liuyu was a famous assassin in the pugilistic world. "Master, is there something wrong with your eyes?" Lung Liuyu's expression was solemn. Looking at Sickly Scholar's twisted expression, she said helplessly, We siblings have relied on each other since we were young. My younger brother is insensible, and as his elder sister, I've taught him. Please forgive me." After saying that, Lung Liuyu bowed deeply to the two of them. Just as Lung Liuyu said, the three siblings had grown up together. When they first met, the oldest, Ling Taihan, was only 12, she was 9, and the youngest, third brother, was only 5. The three of them had no one to rely on as they wandered the pugilistic world. Later, the three of them were taken into the Yangwang chamber. In a place like the Yangwang chamber, only 2 or 3 out of 10 children could survive. It was also Ling Taihan who protected the two of them. Among them, third brother's martial arts aptitude was the worst. In order to let this little brother survive such a cruel training, she and big brother had put in a lot of effort. But in a place that Lung Liuyu did not know, no one could understand how he grew up to have such a personality. However, no matter what, he had never done anything to betray his sworn brother and sister. In fact, he had always listened to the two of them whenever they talked. Just based on this, the two of them could not ignore him. Second sister, sickly scholar glared at Lung Liuyu, his face pale. Ever since the three of them took over the Yangwang chamber, his second sister had never been so submissive to anyone. But now, it was all because of him. It was as if he was an insensible little brother who would never grow up. Master Shin, Master. Pavilion Master Ling and Prince can be considered old acquaintances. I hope that the two of you can make an exception, Yi Li said softly. Shen Yang faintly glanced at Yi Li and said with a faint smile, Elder Lin isn't wrong. If this brat continued to torment himself, even the emerald falling flower wouldn't be able to save his life. Did he really think that the falling jade flower was an immortal medicine? Did he really think that as long as he had half a breath left, he would still be alive and kicking? Wang Fei, don't even think about the prescription in his hands. I think he clearly doesn't want to live anymore. Maybe he wants to die together with the prince. Hearing this, sickly scholar's expression changed slightly. His face was ashen and he didn't say anything. Yi Li saw this and was secretly surprised. Could it be that Mo Xiaoyao and sickly scholar really had some deep-seated hatred? After thinking for a while, Yi Li said, no matter what, Pavilion Master Ling will be staying in Glass City for a while. We have to give him face. I ask Mr. Shun and Master to put in some effort. Moreover, Yi Li gave a low laugh and said softly, didn't Mr. Shun say that Prince's illness was very boring because he hadn't seen any difficult illnesses in all these years? Now, does this one count as having a difficult illness? Hearing this, Shen Yang's eyes lit up. Although sickly scholar's illness and Prince's poison were completely different concepts, there were still some areas where they could be studied together. Of course, he couldn't use Mo Xiaoyao to study, so he will obediently let this old man take a look. Yi Li didn't hide this from Lung Liuyu and sickly scholar. Without waiting for sickly scholar to reply, Lung Liuyu answered first, Mr. Shen, don't worry. I guarantee that he will be obedient. Yi Li gave a faint smile as she looked at sickly scholar who wanted to object but didn't say anything in the end. She blinked her eyes. She seemed to know how to treat this annoying fellow. The three people from the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce stayed in the Prince Ding mansion. With Ling Taihan and Lung Liuyu around, Yi Li didn't have to worry about sickly scholar playing any tricks. However, she still ordered Mo Hua to send 20 more shadow guards to stand guard in the main courtyard. Qin Feng also sent 4 of Qi Lin's elites to stand guard in the main courtyard. As long as sickly scholar dared to take a step closer to the main courtyard, they would immediately kill him. After all, the others were fine, but Mo Xiaobao was still an infant who didn't have any ability to resist. Naturally, they had to be extra careful. Duel. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Yi Li frowned slightly. She put down Mo Xiaobao who was looking around in her arms. Why would Tower Master Ling want to duel with you? Mo Xiaoyao put down the teacup and pulled Yi Li into his arms. He smiled and said, Li, don't worry. Ling Taihan isn't an idiot. Even if he really wants to duel, he won't make both sides suffer. That wouldn't be good for him. Although the Prince Ding mansion was coveted by various forces, to put it bluntly, the Mohist army didn't really need him, the prince, to lead the charge. Even if Mo Xiaoyao wasn't the #1 expert in the world, As long as he was alive, he was still Prince Ding. The Mohist army was still the Mohist army. However, the Yangwang chamber was different. The Yangwang chamber was an assassin organization. They had countless enemies in Jianghu. If it wasn't for Ling Tihan's martial arts, they wouldn't have been able to live peacefully for so many years. Once Ling Tihan and he were both injured, the enemies in Jianghu would probably immediately attack the Yangwang chamber. Yi Li leaned in Mo Xiaoyao's arms and thought, "Who asked Tower Master Ling to deal with you? Genom of Gojosian?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, "No, it shouldn't be Lei Zhenting. Lei Zhenting is a prideful person. He just fought to a draw with me, so he definitely wouldn't ask someone else to fight me. If I was defeated by someone else, wouldn't that mean that Genom of Gojosian is not only inferior to father, inferior to me, and inferior to Ling Taihan?" Yi Li lowered her eyebrows and thought that this made sense. After thinking for a while, she said in a low voice, "Tan Jizhi. It couldn't be Mo Jingqi. If it was Mo Jingqi, he would have directly asked for Mo Xiaoyao to be killed and not compete with him. Only Tan Jizhi. Tan Jizhi was currently in the northwest. If Mo Xiaoyao was seriously injured, it would be much more convenient for him to do anything in the northwest." Zhao laughed softly. It seems that Tan Jizhi still hasn't given up on the treasure left behind by his ancestors. It was no wonder that Yi Li wanted to laugh. The previous Emperor Gaozu was too evil. He built such a large imperial mausoleum and gave his descendants hope, but the most important thing was fake. If it was Yi Li, she also couldn't help but curse him. Yi Li could almost imagine the Emperor Gaozu holding the fake imperial jade seal with a wretched smile when the imperial mausoleum was completed. Mo Xiaoyao nodded his head and said, "I remember that Li also said that there were some clues in the imperial mausoleum." When Yi Li had just returned, Mo Xiaoyao only thought of keeping her by his side. How could he have the mind to think about these things? Afterwards, he had to take care of the fetus and his body before Mo Xiaoyao was born. Although Mo Xiaoyao heard a few words from Yi Li, he quickly threw it to the back of his mind. He had no interest in the imperial jade seal. Without the previous emperor's treasure, his Mohist army wouldn't starve to death. Yi Li also remembered this matter. She stood up from Mo Xiaoyao's body and walked to a hidden compartment on the side. She took out the bright yellow silk from the imperial mausoleum. Mo Xiaoyao took the silk. The first thing he saw was the 2 lines of arrogant and vile handwriting. He couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. He looked suspiciously at Yi Li and asked, "Is there a problem with this?" Yi Li nodded her head and sat down next to Mo Xiaoyao. She carefully spread the silk on the table. It was unknown what kind of craftsmanship was used to make it. This silk had been in the imperial mausoleum for several hundred years. It was also brought out of the imperial mausoleum. Not to mention decaying, it didn't even lose its color. Pointing at the curvy handwriting on the edges of the silk, Yi Li smiled and said, "The real treasure map is here." The curvy handwriting on the edges of the bright yellow silk was very small. If one didn't look carefully, it would be easy to mistake it for a normal pattern like clouds or waves. Yi Li smiled in her heart. The curvy handwriting of the founder of the country was very good. Chapter 483. Mo Xiaoyao stared at the silk for a while, then said with a frown, "This should be a type of writing. I remember that some of the books left behind by the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu personally examined would sometimes have these strange symbols left behind in some inconspicuous places. However, most of the time, there would only be a few scattered ones, so they would usually be treated as random markings and ignored. However, the silk in front of them had at least 100 symbols woven into it. Mo Xiaoyao was an extremely intelligent person, so he naturally saw a pattern. At the same time, he was certain that this was a type of writing that they did not understand at all. Yi Li nodded and smiled. "Correct, this really is a type of writing." Yi Li picked up the brush and ink that had been placed to the side. She looked at the silk in front of her as she absent-mindedly ground the ink. Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a while, then asked, "Li recognizes this type of writing?" Yi Li smiled and nodded. She raised her head and glanced at him. "I truly do recognize this type of writing. This is a type of writing from the extreme west, a place even more distant than the countries of the western regions. However, I will not tell you why I know this. The room was silent for a while. Yi Li did not pay attention to him. After grinding the ink, she spread out a roll of paper and began to translate the characters on it. After a while, Mo Xiaoyao suddenly fiercely pulled her into his embrace. Yi Li stopped writing, but did not turn her head to look at him. She only heard Mo Xiaoyao say in a low voice, "There was once a rumor that the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu did not die at all, but suddenly disappeared. That is why his tomb and body could not be found. Li, could it be that you are the same as him?" Hearing this, Yi Li could not help but smile. She put down the brush and turned her head to look at the man who was staring at her with a serious expression. She raised her head and gently kissed him on the lips. Yi Li said in a low voice, "Do you know where the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu came from?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. The previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu was born in a chaotic era, as if he had come out of nowhere. No one knew of his past, his family, or even his parents. His background was the same as his early life, which was why he became one of the most mysterious emperors in history. Yi Li laughed and said, "Then Prince, do you know where I come from, and which family I come from?" Mo Xiaoyao looked deeply at the smiling woman in front of him. Yes, his Li was different from that emperor. Li was the daughter of the Yi family. Her mother was born in the Shu family of Yunju. Yi Li sighed and leaned into his embrace. She smiled and said, "My family, my husband, and my children are all here. Where can I go?" Mo Xiaoyao's hands tightly clasped Yi Li's waist as he leaned his forehead against hers and said in a low voice, "Li, if you leave me, I will throw Mo Xiaobao out to become a beggar." Yi Li was speechless as she raised her hand to pinch his handsome cheeks. Dr. Lin's medicine was very effective. In just a few months, even if they were this close to each other, there were no visible scars. She forcefully pinched Mo Xiaoyao's handsome face and said, "How many times have you used my baby to threaten me? I already told you not to joke about my baby. He's still young and doesn't understand. When he grows up, he will be sad when he hears your words." Mo Xiaoyao pulled away Yi Li's hand that was pinching his face until it turned red. He unhappily glared at the babbling Mo Xiaobao who was lying in the cradle. Li actually pinched him for this brat. Of course, this debt would be placed on Mo Xiaobao. As a result, Mo Xiaobao was implicated when he was still a baby. Li. Mo Xiaoyao hugged Yi Li and buried his face in the hair on her shoulder. His voice sounded a bit low and muffled. Yi Li helplessly rolled her eyes. She couldn't afford to hurt a man who suddenly had a heart of glass. She lightly patted Mo Xiaoyao's shoulder and said, "All right, I promise I won't leave you. Be good. I still need to translate this. Don't you want to see it?" "I don't want to," Mo Xiaoyao said in a muffled voice. He hated the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu. If he was going to die, then he should die cleanly. What was the point of leaving behind a treasure map? "Then what do you want?" Yi Li took a deep breath in her heart. She decided that if Mo Xiaoyao continued to cause trouble, she would chase him out. Mo Xiaoyao carried her to the bed behind the screen. "I'm tired. Rest with me." In a daze, Yi Li, who was already pressed down on the bed, couldn't help but roll her eyes at the bed curtains. "Mo Xiaoyao, could you be any more childish?" Without giving her a chance to retort or speak, an even hotter flame instantly engulfed the two people lying in each other's embrace. Yi Li quickly translated the words on the silk. It was a good thing that Emperor Gaozu didn't trick them this time. The real location of the treasure was in the northwest. It wasn't very far from Glass City, but now clearly wasn't the right time to dig for the treasure. They had to at least wait until the nobles of the various countries that were secretly searching for the treasure in the northwest had all retreated. Yi Li handed the translated text to Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao only took a glance and memorized it in his heart. He then casually burned the translated text and the original treasure map, leaving no trace behind. Yi Li arranged for the people of Yangwang Chamber to stay in a medium-sized courtyard in the northwest corner of the residence. Although Glass City wasn't completely smooth right now, compared to the chaos outside, it was rare for it to be peaceful. Yi Li didn't have anything important to do, so she turned her attention to the Bai Luo flower. The first thing she wanted to do was naturally to deal with sickly scholar, the bastard who deserved a beating. After breakfast, Yi Li went to visit the courtyard where the people of Yangwang Chamber were staying. Ling Taihan and Leng Liuyu were currently sparring. Sickly scholar sat alone at the side and stared fixedly at his brother and sister who were flying and dodging around in the garden. His expression was gloomy, and his hand that was holding onto the chair gripped the armrest tightly, as if he wanted to scratch a few marks on the mahogany chair. Yi Li smiled as she walked to sickly scholar's side. She casually smiled and said, "I've long heard that although Pavilion Master Leng is a woman, she is also one of the top experts in the Jianghu. Looking at it now, you and Pavilion Master Ling are indeed a good couple." Sickly scholar's facial muscles twitched. He raised his head and looked at Yi Li darkly. Because of Yi Li's profession in her previous life, what kind of evil and perverted person hadn't she seen before? Sickly scholar's bit of skill wasn't enough for her to take him seriously. She smiled as she looked at sickly scholar and said, "Speaking of which, it's strange. Pavilion Master Leng should be in her early 30s this year, right? A girl at this age who hasn't married yet. Pavilion Master Ling is really holding her back. Later, I should mention this to my prince and ask him to remind Pavilion Master Ling third Pavilion Master, don't you think so?" Yi Li. Sickly scholar gritted his teeth. What followed was another earth-shaking cough. When he took his hand away, his palm was stained with blood. On the other side, Ling Taihan and Leng Liuyu naturally heard the commotion. They quickly stopped the fight and rushed back. "Third brother, what's wrong?" Ling Taihan asked in a deep voice. Sickly scholar didn't appreciate it. He raised his head and looked hatefully at Ling Taihan before returning to his room. Ling Taihan frowned and said to Leng Liuyu, "Liuyu, go take a look at him." Leng Liuyu nodded silently. She put away the pair of short thorns in her hands and turned to enter the room. Ling Taihan casually picked up a towel to wipe his hands. He turned and said to Yi Li, "Princess, third brother's health really isn't good. Princess, please have mercy." Yi Li raised an eyebrow and smiled. So Ling Taihan had seen that sickly scholar had suddenly coughed up blood because of her anger. Yi Li didn't refuse. She waved her sleeve and sat down across from Ling Taihan. She said with a smile, "Pavilion Master Ling, even if third Pavilion Master is your relative, you can't be too biased. This consort was also angered by third Pavilion Master yesterday. If I can't vent this anger, this consort won't be able to eat or sleep well." Ling Taihan was helpless. His own sworn brother's mouth wasn't something an outsider could say. Even he, as the older brother, sometimes wanted to give him a good beating. Looking at Yi Li and sighing, Ling Taihan said, "Is Princess wondering why this one keeps protecting third brother?" Chapter 484. Yi Li nodded slightly. She was indeed a little curious. With Ling Taihan's personality and temperament, he shouldn't like someone as stubborn and ruthless as sickly scholar. It wasn't that Ling Taihan was merciful, but even though Ling Taihan was the king of Hell's pavilion lord, he was much more open and upright than those righteous people who acted like thieves and prostitutes in the dark. Such a person definitely wouldn't like someone with a twisted mind. Ling Taihan sighed with some regret. "I've known my two younger siblings since childhood. Although my third brother was taciturn when he was young, he wasn't like this. At that time, we were still children, and we didn't have any skills. Naturally, we suffered a lot. One year, Liu Yu was seriously ill, and we spent all our savings, but how could that little savings be enough to treat the illness? In order to save Liu Yu, the third brother sold himself and left with the others, leaving behind only the money. After Liu Yu recovered, we joined the Yangwang Chamber. Liu Yu practiced martial arts day and night in the hope that one day he would be able to find my third brother. By the time I found my third brother, it was already more than a year later. No one knew how much he had suffered during that time. When we found him, he was seriously injured and almost dying. My third brother's aptitude wasn't good. Even if he practiced martial arts, he wouldn't be able to reach the level of Liu Yu and I. He wasn't suitable for a place like the Yangwang Chamber. After he recovered, Liu Yu and I hoped that he would live a peaceful life like an ordinary person. With Liu Yu and I looking after him, he wouldn't be bullied. But who knew that he? Ling Taihan smiled bitterly. He didn't listen to our advice at all. In the end, he joined the Yangwang chamber by himself. With his aptitude, if he practiced martial arts, he would at most become a second-rate assassin in the Yangwang chamber. Most of the time, he would be used as cannon fodder. So he took another path and specialized in poison, which made him a top assassin in the Yangwang chamber. Although he was ruthless to outsiders, he was extremely good to his own people. Although she was an assassin, Moonflow was still a woman. Sometimes, she would be soft-hearted. Every time, third brother would take the initiative to help Liu Yu accept some business that she couldn't do. Yi Li quietly listened to Ling Tihan's words. She didn't expect that the three leaders of the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce, the most feared organization in Jianghu, had such a past. However, it made sense. After all, innate perverts were in the minority. Sickly Scholar's mental illness wasn't cultivated in a day. Pavilion Master Ling and Pavilion Master Leng are tolerating him because you feel sorry for him? Ling Taihan remained silent. Clearly, he agreed with Yi Li's words. At that time, Ling Taihan was still young and full of vigor. Moreover, he lived in a place like the King of Hell's pavilion. Therefore, he spent most of his energy on improving his martial arts. By the time he came back to his senses, his sworn younger brother had already become a frightening poison master in Jianghu. Yi Li looked thoughtfully at Ling Taihan and asked, speaking of the three pavilion masters, even third pavilion master should be close to 30 this year, but you haven't married yet. Why is that? Ling Taihan looked down thoughtfully. After a while, he sighed and said, this one is focused on martial arts. I really don't have any thoughts of marrying. Moreover, the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce is in the business of killing people. Those who kill will be killed by others. It's better not to have any family. But, after hearing what Wang Fei said today, this one just remembered that it delayed Liu Yu and third brother. Yi Li couldn't help but frown. She looked closely at Ling Tihan's calm and vexed expression. It seemed that Ling Taihan really didn't have any feelings for Lung Liu Yu. It was certain that Sickly Scholar had a crush on Lung Liu Yu. If Ling Taihan didn't have any feelings for Lung Liu Yu, then this matter would be much easier to handle. But she didn't know what Lung Liu Yu was thinking. Even if a woman was an assassin, she shouldn't be over 30 and still not have a sweetheart, right? The only men close to Lung Liu Yu were Sickly Scholar and Ling Taihan. If Yi Li had to choose, Yi Li felt that she couldn't abandon Ling Taihan and like Sickly Scholar. Pavilion Master Ling knows why this Fei has come? Yi Li asked softly. Ling Taihan nodded and said, of course. Over the next 2 days, Liu Yu and I will try our best to persuade third brother to give up the prescription. After all, this is a matter that benefits both sides. There is no need to make it so that both sides suffer. Then, Pavilion Master Ling, please answer this Fei's question. Yi Li said. Ling Taihan was startled and a bit surprised, but he still nodded and said, I will tell you everything I know. Yi Li looked down and asked in a low voice, what does Pavilion Master Ling think of Pavilion Master Leng? Ling Taihan frowned and said, of course I think of Liu Yu as my younger sister. Ling Taihan reacted very quickly and immediately understood what Yi Li meant. His calm and handsome face showed surprise as he said, Princess's meaning is? Yi Li smiled faintly and was about to nod when she heard the sound of clothes fluttering behind her. The two of them turned around at the same time and saw Lung Liuyue's black figure walking away. Yi Li looked helplessly at Ling Taihan and gave a bitter smile. It seemed that Lung Liuyu had heard their conversation. More importantly, Lung Liuyu really did have feelings for Ling Taihan, so she had left in sadness after hearing Ling Tihan's words. Pavilion Master Lung is not familiar with Glass City, so Pavilion Master Ling should go take a look first. Don't let anything happen. Ling Taihan also knew that Glass City was not like other places. The Prince Ding Mansion's Shadow Guard, the Mohist Army's Black Cloud Cavalry, and the mysterious Qi Lin were all gathered around this city. If Lung Liuyu really caused any trouble, she would not be able to escape unscathed. Nodding, Ling Taihan got up and chased after Lung Liuyu. Looking in the direction that Ling Tihan's figure had disappeared in, Yi Li's warm smile faded and her beautiful face was gradually dyed with a layer of coldness. Originally, she should not interfere with the emotional entanglements of the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce, but if this was Sickly Scholar's only weakness, she did not mind using his feelings for Lung Liuyu to achieve her goal. Standing up, Yi Li slowly walked towards the room that Sickly Scholar was resting in. Before she walked in, she heard intermittent coughing coming from inside. Shen Yang and Dr. Lin were right. Sickly Scholar's illness was beyond cure. Pushing open the door and going in, the person inside heard the sound of the door opening and suddenly turned around. But when he saw that the person at the door was Yi Li, his eyes gradually dimmed. "What are you doing here? As the Wang Fei, you don't even know to report before entering someone's room?" Yi Li did not care about his rudeness. She walked into the room with a smile and sat down in a chair not far from his bed. She said with a faint smile, "Just now, I was talking to Pavilion Master Ling and was not paying attention, so Pavilion Master Lung heard it." Then Pavilion Master Lung ran out by herself. "What are you talking about?" A trace of worry flashed through Sickly Scholar's eyes as he angrily shouted at Yi Li. Yi Li blinked and said with a smile, "Nothing. We were just talking about how Pavilion Master Ling said that he treated Pavilion Master Lung as his own little sister. Is there a problem?" Sickly Scholar stilled. For once, he did not spit venom at Yi Li and lowered his head in silence. Seeing that Sickly Scholar did not speak, Yi Li's lips hooked in a faint smile. She said with a serious expression, "Third Pavilion Master, in this world, there is no such thing as having the best of both worlds. The key is the choice of the person. Compared to spending the rest of your life with the person you truly love, is it really that important to fight with my prince? If it is said that my Wangye and you have some enmity for the destruction of your family, then it is fine. But from what I know, other than that fight a few years ago, you and my Wangye do not have any other contact. Even the family that you were born in does not have any grudges with Ding Wangfu. Why do you have to be like this? Take a step back and you will see the world. This phrase is sometimes reasonable. What do you think?" Chapter 485. Sickly Scholar suddenly raised his head and glared fiercely at Yi Li. The expression on his face changed unpredictably. There was anger at being seen through by Yi Li, hatred and unwillingness towards Mo Xiaoyao, as well as an indescribable sense of inferiority and sadness. "You make it sound so nice, but don't you just want the prescription?" Yi Li nodded in agreement and said with a smile, "I'm naturally saying this for the prescription and for my husband's life. Could it be that I'm trying to be a matchmaker for Third Pavilion Master? It's not like I have nothing better to do. With the prescription, I'll be happy if my prince can keep his life. Now that you've recovered, whether or not you want to pursue Pavilion Master Lung is your own business. Speaking of which, if Second Pavilion Master really ends up in Third Pavilion Master's hands in the future, this consort will feel guilty." From Yi Li's point of view, the strange Sickly Scholar was not worthy of Lung Liuyu at all. So she could only use Lung Liuyu as an opening to talk to Sickly Scholar and would definitely not help him pursue Lung Liuyu. Of course, a woman like Lung Liuyu would definitely have a firm heart. If Sickly Scholar was unable to move her, then other people's ideas might not work. Sickly Scholar hated it the most when people said that he wasn't worthy of Lung Liuyu. Although he knew in his heart that he wasn't worthy of his adopted sister, he couldn't allow others to say it. Yi Li saw that she had said enough, so she got up and prepared to leave. "Third Pavilion Master, think about it carefully. Do you want to try keeping your life, or do you want to gamble with my prince and see who has a harder life? I promise that I will find a suitable husband for Pavilion Master Lung before you die." Leaning against the bed, Sickly Scholar coughed violently as he watched Yi Li leave without any hesitation. "Yi Li, you're ruthless enough." Yi Li had indeed grasped his Achilles heel. He was never a gentleman, and if he really had to watch Lung Liuyu marry someone else, it would be worse than letting him die. No one knew what Ling Taihan and Lung Liuyu had talked about. Later that night, the two of them returned to the Prince Ding mansion as if nothing had happened. After dinner, Yi Li and Shu Qingchen had a rare moment of leisure as they played chess and chatted. Sickly Scholar asked the guards in the courtyard to deliver a piece of cloth that was filled with ancient handwriting. It was made of an unknown material. Yi Li unfolded it and a satisfied smile appeared on her face. She handed the cloth to Qin Feng behind her and instructed him to personally deliver it to Shenyang and Dr. Lin's courtyard. Yi Li looked more relaxed now that she had finally resolved the matter that had been weighing on her mind for a long time. Shu Qingchen pondered as he fiddled with a chess piece and said, "You've obtained the prescription for the Bai Luo flower. Why are you so happy?" Yi Li smiled and said, "Of course I'm happy. Is Big Brother not happy?" Shu Qingchen shook his head and said with a smile, "A grown woman cannot be kept at home." Yi Li was embarrassed by his words. She had already been married for more than 2 years. Shu Qingchen put down a chess piece indifferently and said with a smile, "You deliberately stirred up the emotional entanglements between Ling Taihan and his 2 siblings to force sickly scholar to submit. Ling Taihan is still upset and has not reacted yet. When he comes back to his senses, he will make trouble for you." Yi Li did not care at all. She raised her hand and put down a chess piece to swallow a few of Shu Qingchen's white pieces and said, "Ling Taihan has the nerve to make trouble for me? That pavilion master Lung is already over 30 years old. She has spent her entire youth on him. He should give someone an explanation, right?" Shu Qingchen's hand that was holding the chess piece paused for a moment. He looked at her with a smile and said, "Why do I feel like you're implying something?" Yi Li immediately felt a chill down her spine when Shu Qingchen stared at her with a smile that was not a smile. However, she still maintained her composure and said, "Is it wrong? In this world, what kind of good family can a woman over 30 find?" Regardless of whether Ling Taihan knows or not, as her big brother, he allowed his adopted sister to be over 30 years old without even asking about her marriage. Isn't that too unreasonable? To put it nicely, Pavilion Master Ling is obsessed with martial arts and is not disturbed by external matters. To put it bluntly, he is a scum who has ruined a woman's life. Scum. Shu Qingchen's smile deepened. "Little sister Li if you have anything else to say to your big brother, you can say it all." Yi Li sweated and scolded herself in her heart for being so disappointing. She did not know why she was so afraid of Shu Qingchen and not Shu Qingze, who had been even more serious since childhood. Of course, this was not just Yi Li's fault. In fact, the 3 brothers of the Shu family were more afraid of the gentle and refined Shu Qingchen. "I'm not talking about you, big brother. Big brother, don't take it personally." Shu Qingchen nodded. Seeing Yi Li's rare guilty look, he sighed helplessly and asked, "Did Princess Anqi come to see you?" Yi Li was a bit embarrassed. Shu Qingchen's love life was not something she should care about. "Princess Anqi didn't say anything about you, but..." Princess Anqi was the princess of a country and the crown princess. The people of Nanjiao were completely different from the culture of the Central Plains. They had no interest in the so-called imperial jade seal, but they still stayed in Glass City for a long time. How could Yi Li not know why? Although Shu Qingchen did not hide from Princess Anqi, he was busy with the affairs in the northwest and did not have much time to accompany her. Every time Princess Anqi came to see Yi Li, she looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. Yi Li sympathized with her. "Big brother, what do you think of Princess Anqi? Second brother is about to get married. Uncle and aunt should have urged you, right?" After thinking for a while, Yi Li decided to ask Shu Qingchen's opinion. Not only because of Princess Anqi, but also because of eldest aunt, grandfather, and uncle, who had always hoped that big brother would get married soon. Princess Anqi is not young anymore. No matter what you think, you should tell her clearly. Shu Qingchen nodded and said, "I know. I will take care of it. Big brother, you, Anqi and I are not suitable." Shu Qingchen smiled calmly and said, "She is the crown princess of Nanjiang. One day, she will inherit the throne of Nanjiao." Yi Li frowned. She was not sure whether Shu Qingchen meant it or not. What if Princess Anqi is willing to give up the throne of Nanjiao? We are just friends. Just friends. Shu Qingchen's refusal was clear in this short sentence. Yi Li could only sigh regretfully in her heart. It seemed that Big Brother and Princess Anqi were not destined to be together. Yi Li threw down the chess piece in her hand and looked at Shu Qingchen, saying, "In that case, I won't talk about this with you. But, if you really don't have this idea, you should tell Princess Anqi clearly as soon as possible." Shu Qingchen nodded and said, "I know. What else do you want to say? Yi Li looked at Shu Qingchen seriously and asked, Big brother and uncle, do you have any misgivings about the prince and the Prince Ding mansion? Shu Qingchen was startled. He also put down the chess piece in his hand and looked at Yi Li, asking, why do you think so? Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled, saying, Big brother, I grew up in the Shu family. When I was young, eldest uncle and big brother taught me a lot. Both eldest uncle and eldest brother are talented people. It is rare to have one of them in the world. And the Shu family is lucky to have two of them. These days, eldest brother and uncle have worked hard on many things in the Northwest. But, with uncle and eldest brother's abilities, you don't have to work so hard, do you? Shu Qingchen lowered his eyes and smiled faintly, saying, Is it Prince Ding's idea? Chapter 486. Yi Li shook her head and said, How can Prince not see through something that even Li can see? But he didn't say anything. Big brother and uncle are so restrained because you don't trust Prince and the Prince Ding mansion? Shu Qingchen was silent for a moment, then shook his head and said, No, I'm just a little tired. Tired? Yi Li didn't understand. Shu Qingchen smiled and said, No matter how much bitterness the Shu family has suffered these years, Yunzhou's Shu family has been the head of scholars for hundreds of years. The Shu family has been able to stand after 2 dynasties because these generations of Shu family members trembled in fear. It's lonely at the top. If the Shu family doesn't want their descendants to be like us, then, the Shu family's reputation gradually fading is the best choice. Yi Li lowered her head, Big brother, you don't trust Li? Shu Qingchen shook his head, No, Big brother isn't awake. But it's not that you don't trust Prince Ding. But what happened after you and Prince Ding? How will your descendants face the Shu family? After 3 dynasties, 2 of them succeeded the emperor. No one would trust such a family, and who wouldn't worry? How deep was the brotherhood between Emperor Taizu and the first-generation Prince Ding? How did it end now? Big brother. Yi Li sighed. How could she not know the Shu family's difficult situation? Once the Mohist army really fought for the world and finally established the Central Plains, then the Shu family would be the greatest contributor to the founding of the country. A family that has been able to stand after 3 dynasties. A family that betrayed the previous dynasty to support the Da Chu state, and betrayed the Da Chu state to support Prince Ding. Even if they had the reputation of being the head of the world's righteousness, they couldn't completely eliminate the suspicion of the world's people and the king. Shu Qingchen looked at her with a smile and said, Don't worry. The Shu family will still stay in the northwest to support Prince Ding until Prince Ding doesn't need to know. Yi Li frowned and said, Big brother, you mean to be a strategist? That's right. Shu Qingchen nodded with a smile. No. Yi Li flatly refused. Big brother, you should know that the strategists of the past dynasties never have a good ending. The so-called strategists were hidden in the dark to give advice to the monarch. Because they knew too many secrets, they were the type to hide the bow after the birds were done. Even the ministers and generals around the monarch would not have a good impression of such people. Wisdom was doubted, incompetence was abandoned. If such a status was imposed on her elder brother and uncle, Yi Li would rather they live in seclusion in the mountains and not care about worldly affairs. Shu Qingchen raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, Could it be that Li thinks that Prince Ding is someone who would cast aside the bow after the birds are done? Yi Li shook her head and said firmly, In any case, it won't work. Big brother, if you and uncle believe in Li, you can stay in the northwest with peace of mind. No matter what happened in the future, Li was willing to guarantee with her life that she would definitely let the Shu family retreat in one piece. If big brother and uncle don't believe me, Li will go and beg the prince to let the Shu clan go into seclusion. Li Yi Li shook her head and looked at Shu Qingchen with bright eyes. Li knows that big brother and uncle are thinking for Li. If the prince relies too much on the Shu family, the old officials of the Prince Ding mansion will definitely be dissatisfied with Li. However, Li will never let uncle and big brother suffer such grievances. Big brother and uncle are geniuses in governing the world, not strategists who hide in the dark and specialize in scheming. Li is right. Before Shu Qingchen could answer, Mo Xiaoyao's voice of approval came from behind. The two turned around and saw Mo Xiaoyao strolling over, his white hair fluttering slightly against his body. Xu Qingchen was just about to stand up, but Mo Xiaoyao was already in front of him. He raised a hand and pressed him back down, smiling as he said, "I didn't think that Big Brother and Big Li would be chatting here. It just so happens that I also wanted to chat with Big Brother, so I came to join in the fun. Big Brother, you don't mind, right?" The consecutive Big Brother made Xu Qingchen's mouth twitch. In the past, Mo Xiaoyao would rather die than call him Big Brother. Xu Qingchen raised his head and smiled faintly. "Prince, please sit." Mo Xiaoyao sat down next to Yi Li and looked at Xu Qingchen seriously. "I don't dare to guarantee the Xu family's prosperity for 100 years, but as Li Li said, I can guarantee that the Xu family will retreat in one piece for as long as I live. Does Big Brother believe me?" Xu Qingchen was silent for a while, then raised his head and smiled. "Prince's words carry enormous weight, how could this one not believe? However, Big Brother, you can forget about calling me that. Prince can just call me by my name." Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows. Xu Qingchen shook his head and smiled, separating public from private matters, whether it's for Prince Li or a fake, it's good. Mo Xiaoyao immediately understood Xu Qingchen's meaning and nodded. "I will use tea in place of wine to toast young Master Qingchen. Many thanks." With the prescription provided by Sickly Scholar, Shen Yang and Dr. Lin were able to produce twice the result with half the effort. Of course, Shen Yang and Dr. Lin had carefully verified that the prescription provided by the sick scholar was indeed an ancient prescription passed down from 1,000 years ago. The two of them had also used various methods and their own knowledge of pharmacology to determine the authenticity of the prescription and the final effect of the medicine they had concocted. From start to finish, they used a full half a month to finally refine what might be the last remaining blue sky flower in the world into a pill and deliver it to Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao. The size of the blue sky flower was not small, and in addition to all kinds of precious herbs, it was impossible to count. But in the end, only a mere 5 pills were refined. Once it was confirmed that the blue sky flower was extinct, then the 5 pills in front of them could be said to be the only ones left in the world. Looking at the fragrant dark brown pills in front of them, everyone's faces could not help but be dyed with joy. Shen Yang had a faint smile on his face as he said, "Prince can take 1 pill first, then take another 3 days later. The poison in his body will be completely neutralized. As for this sickly boy, his body can't take it, so he can only take a quarter of the pill each time. He can only take 1 pill every 5 days. You only need 1 pill. After that, you just need to find a famous doctor to nurse your body back to health." Sickly Scholar looked at him coldly and said, "There are 5 pills in total, and you're only giving me 1? Dr. Lin sneered and said, "We only need 2. Why don't we give the rest to you, and you can try taking 1 pill each time like Prince Ding? Your body is weak, and you're blaming the doctor for using too little medicine." He was clearly saying that Sickly Scholar's body was too weak and could not take the medicine. Using too much medicine was indeed effective, but Sickly Scholar's body could not take it. Ling Taihan reached out and patted Sickly Scholar's shoulder. He put away the bottle of medicine that Shen Yang handed over and said with a smile, "Many thanks to Mr. Shen and Dr. Lin. I've troubled the two of you." The two godly doctors' expressions became slightly better. Dr. Lin casually threw out 2 prescriptions and said, "Use these 2 prescriptions as you see fit. You should be fine after a year or so. You need to pay attention to your health and mind, otherwise it will inevitably leave behind side effects." Ling Taihan carefully put away the prescription and thanked Dr. Lin seriously. Sickly Scholar did not say anything, but after hearing Dr. Lin's words, the light in his eyes could not help but brighten. The medicine refined by the 2 godly doctors was indeed very effective. Mo Xiaoyao only used 1 pill, and the poison in his body had already been reduced by more than half. His complexion did not look as pale as before, and even his usual cold body temperature was somewhat normal. Presumably, after the poison was completely removed, Mo Xiaoyao's body would be able to fully recover after a year or so of recuperation. However, ever since the poison was removed, Mo Xiaoyao's leg, which had been healed for more than a year, began to ache again. This made Yi Li have no choice but to pull Mo Xiaoyao to Shenyang's side to examine him. Shenyang was obviously not surprised by this situation. He stroked his beautiful beard and said, "Last year, this one said that the reason why Prince could walk freely was because of the phoenix tail grass. The phoenix tail grass is a fire poison, and its heat is comparable to the cold poison in the cold pond. It was also this fire poison that temporarily broke through the meridians in Prince's legs that were originally blocked due to his serious injuries. Now that the poison in Prince's body has been removed, the original leg injury will naturally relapse." Chapter 487. Yi Li frowned and said, "Could it be that after the poison in Prince's body is completely cured, Prince will still be unable to move?" Hearing this, Mo Xiaoyao held Yi Li's right hand tightly. Yi Li tilted her head and gave him a faint smile. Shenyang said, "That won't be the case. When the phoenix tail grass fire poison was planted in Prince's leg, it had some effect and opened up the meridians that were completely blocked. But Prince's injuries were not light and it was an old injury from 10 years ago. How could there not be any hidden dangers? Now that he has just been cured, he is not used to it yet. When the poison in Prince's body is completely cured, I will prescribe some medicine to treat the old injury. In the future, it will only be a little troublesome when the weather is cloudy and rainy. Many people have this problem, it is not a big deal." Hearing Shenyang say this, Yi Li was relieved. Indeed, even if it was a serious injury like the one in her previous life, even after a long period of recovery, it was not guaranteed that there would be no sequelae. Not to mention that Mo Xiaoyao's injury had been there for 10 years. It was already a good result for his leg to hurt when it was cloudy and rainy. Nodding, Yi Li said, "Then I will have to trouble Mr. Shen." Shenyang packed his things and said with a smile, "Princess, you don't have to be so polite. After so many years, Prince has finally recovered. This one also has a load off my mind." Yi Li also knew that Shenyang had stayed in the Prince Ding mansion all these years because of Mo Xiaoyao's illness and because of the friendship between Shenyang and Mo Liufang. She did not say any more words of thanks. These years, Shenyang had done a lot for Mo Xiaoyao and the Prince Ding mansion. Verbal thanks would be hypocritical. The confidants in the Prince Ding mansion were all secretly happy that Prince's body was about to fully recover. But the entire northwest was surging with undercurrents. When Tanjiji's whereabouts and the news of the Imperial Jade Seal were suddenly leaked, although the northwest was still calm on the surface, it was unknown how many people had secretly fought. Among them, the most unlucky person was Tanjiji. Originally, Tanjiji only wanted to come to the northwest to pick up Shu Manlin and cause trouble for Mo Xiaoyao. Who would have thought that everything would go wrong after he entered the northwest? First, he didn't even see Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li. Then, his whereabouts and identity were suddenly exposed to the whole world. As a result, he had to deal with the people who came to ask for the Imperial Jade Seal and the whereabouts of the treasure every day. How could he have the energy to make trouble for Mo Xiaoyao? Tanjiji also understood that his current situation was definitely due to Ding Wangfu adding fuel to the fire behind the scenes. He smiled faintly and said, "Since I have already given away a copy of the treasure map, it doesn't matter if I give away a few more copies. Isn't that right?" It seemed that in just a few days, the so-called treasure map of the previous dynasty's great ancestor had spread throughout the entire northwest. It could be said that almost everyone with a bit of ability and influence had a copy of it. Naturally, the study of the Prince Ding mansion could not avoid the appearance of such a treasure map. Mo Xiaoyao only glanced at the treasure map before tossing it to Feng Zhiyao, who was beside him. Just by looking at Mo Xiaoyao's attitude, Feng Zhiyao knew that this so-called treasure map was most likely not the real deal. However, Han Mingxi was very interested in it. He stretched out his hand and pulled the map from Feng Zhiyao's hands to study it carefully. He had just been extorted by Mo Xiaoyao for hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. His heart was still hurt and he needed a large amount of income to make up for it. After thinking for a moment, Han Mingxi frowned and said, "Isn't this the place where Wang Fei fell off the cliff?" Even though the map was drawn somewhat abstractly, Han Mingxi was a businessman who often traveled outside. After looking carefully for a while, He was able to recognize the location marked on the map. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao had not expected that Tan Jiji would hand over a real treasure map. The location was the Imperial Mausoleum that Dr. Lin had taken Yi Li to. Even though there was no Imperial Jade Seal or Great Ancestors treasure there, it was still a Great Ancestors Imperial Mausoleum. If it was just to deceive those who were watching him, the price was too high. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, "Why do we care what he wants to do? In the northwest, what can he do? Han Mingxi, if you are interested, you can come along and join in the fun." Hearing this, Han Mingxi's eyes lit up. He knew that Yi Li had once entered the Imperial Mausoleum. He hurriedly turned to Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and said, "There are indeed many valuable things inside. It can be considered a good Imperial Mausoleum, but if it's a treasure trove, it's still a bit lacking." Han Mingxi understood. This was an Imperial Mausoleum, not a treasure trove of legends. But that was fine. There were many treasures inside the Imperial Mausoleum. Han Mingxi was busy fighting with various factions for the treasures in the Imperial Mausoleum. In less than 2 days, Tan Jiji, who had been pursued both openly and secretly, had delivered himself to the door. Chapter 488. Seeing Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao once again, the arrogance on Tan Jiji's face faded a lot. Seeing the two respectfully come forward to greet him, Yi Li smiled and asked, "It's been a long time, is Master Tan well?" Tan Jiji smiled bitterly and looked at Yi Li. "Why does Princess ask when you already know the answer?" Yi Li had no sympathy for Tan Jiji's emaciated and tired appearance. She smiled as usual. "This consort and the prince have heard about what happened recently. It's been hard on Master Tan." Tan Jiji felt a lump of air in his chest that he couldn't swallow or spit out. His face turned green and white. After a while, he recovered and cupped his hands to the two. "This humble one asked to see you today because I agreed to take Lin away from the northwest. When does the prince and princess plan to let her go?" Yi Li smiled and said, "Anytime. Master Tan looks as if we're going back on our word." This consort also said that Princess Anshi is still in the northwest. It's not safe for Nanjiang's holy maiden to leave the prince's mansion. Since Master Tan insists, this consort can't persuade you otherwise. But the safety of Nanjiang's holy maiden after she leaves the prince's mansion has nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion. Tan Jiji said in a low voice, "Of course." Hearing him say this, Yi Li was also straightforward. She waved her hand and asked Qin Feng to bring Shu Manlin over. Not long after, Shu Manlin was brought into the study. When she saw Tan Jiji, she immediately threw herself into his arms and began to sob. Tan Jiji looked down at her. Although she had lost some weight, he could see that she hadn't suffered much. The Prince Ding mansion also didn't make things difficult for Shu Manlin. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. He pulled Shu Manlin and was about to leave. "Many thanks to the prince and princess. This humble one will leave now." Yi Li smiled faintly and said that she wouldn't see them out. She then had someone lead the two of them out. Because many people had rushed to the vicinity of the Imperial Mausoleum, Glass City was unusually quiet. Only then did Yi Li take some time out of the city to inspect Qi Lin's base. This was the first time Yi Li had left the city after returning to Glass City. Qi Lin's encampment was located in a secluded valley 15 kilometers away from Glass City. The encampment was similar to the one she had built near the capital, but it was much larger and there were many more training programs. This was something that Qin Feng had figured out with Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, and the others. The moment Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and the others accompanied Yi Li into the valley, they saw a few young men lined up neatly in a wide open space. They raised their right hands in front of their chests and bowed to them. "Greetings, Princess Consort." Yi Li looked over and immediately saw Shu Qingfeng standing in the front row. In the mountains near Hongju, it could be said that it was much more lively than Glass City these days. Although so many people suddenly gathered here, many people knew that something was wrong. They were probably fooled by Tan Jiji. But the charm of the Imperial Jade Seal was irresistible to most people. Originally, everyone just stayed in the dark and didn't interfere with each other's business. But one afternoon, when a group of people finally found the entrance to the imperial mausoleum, this place really became lively. Probably because they already knew about the imperial mausoleum, this time, many people brought along many tomb robbers. So it wasn't surprising that the entrance near Hongju could be found. But the entrance near Hongju could only be used to leave and not enter. Needless to say, it would take a lot of manpower to break through the door. If they weren't careful, they could collapse the entire tomb or even the underground palace. At that time, the losses would outweigh the gains. So the people weren't in a hurry. In the end, everyone even had the intention of working together to solve the problem of the entrance. Han Mingxi didn't go up to join in the fun. Everyone knew that he was a member of the Prince Ding mansion. Even if he wanted to go up, they probably wouldn't welcome him. So he just brought a few of his subordinates and followed from a distance, preparing to take advantage of the situation when the time was right. After all, the imperial mausoleum was so big. It was impossible for all these people to be in the air. But there was one thing that Han Mingxi was secretly puzzled about. Even if this place was some distance away from Glass City, the prince and Wang Fei couldn't be completely unaware of the situation here. They actually left such a golden mountain and these people alone. It wasn't like Prince Ding's style and temper at all. Big brother, what do you think about this? Han Mingxi came back to his senses and asked Han Mingyu, who was sitting next to him. Ever since Su Zuidi died, Han Mingyu had been unable to recover. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li naturally couldn't be bothered to care for him because of Han Mingxi. They just threw him to Han Mingxi to take care of. No matter if it was for the sake of their brotherhood and Han Mingyu's life, or for the safety of the Han Mingyu clan, Han Mingxi would take good care of Han Mingyu and not let him cause trouble. These days, Han Mingyu had been staying in Han Mingxi's fu and didn't come out. Right now, he was completely pale and lifeless like a moving corpse. He didn't have the grace of Master Mingyu in the past. Han Mingxi really couldn't stand it anymore. This trip to the Imperial Mausoleum was his personal matter, so he dragged Han Mingyu along. Chapter 489. Perhaps because he did not hear Han Mingxi's question, Han Mingyu's eyes moved slightly, but he did not answer. Han Mingxi did not expect this big brother to give him any advice. He only hoped that he would not cause trouble and live well. That way, he would not let down his big brother's education and the ancestors of the Han family. Thus, Han Mingyu's silence did not make Han Mingxi angry. He just casually leaned against the tree and said thoughtfully, "I always feel that Prince Ding will not let me earn money so easily." Han Mingyu lowered his head and did not speak. Han Mingxi waved his hand and sighed. "Forget it. We'll know what's going on when the time comes." He did not believe that Prince Ding would allow so many people to mess around in the northwest. Cheers came from the stone wall at the bottom of a cliff. "It's open! It's open!" The people gathered at the foot of the cliff were overjoyed. Although it had been a few days since they found the entrance, even with the world's best tomb raiders and construction experts gathered together, they still spent a lot of time to open the entrance to the Imperial Mausoleum intact. After all, they could not see anything from the outside and could not estimate what the mechanisms inside were like. One careless move could cause the entire mausoleum to collapse. At that time, what they would have to dig was not just the entrance door, but one or even several mountains. Fortunately, in the end, someone thought of digging a hole from the side and confirmed the position of the mechanisms inside. Only then was the entrance to the Imperial Mausoleum that had been hidden for hundreds of years opened. At the same time, this also proved that Tan Jiji had not lied to them. The treasure map he had given them was indeed a treasure map to an Imperial Mausoleum. The person who came out from inside said with an excited smile, "This really is an Imperial Mausoleum. The underground palace is very far from here. This Imperial Mausoleum is very large. Quickly go and report to the master." Not long after, the people from all sides had arrived, and no one was left behind. Lei Tongfeng frowned as he looked at the entrance in front of him and asked, "This is the entrance to the Imperial Mausoleum of the previous dynasty's founding emperor? Isn't that a bit too stingy?" Someone in the crowd stepped forward and said, "Prince, you may not know, but this mausoleum is different from other Imperial mausoleums. From the very beginning, There was no plan for future generations to pay their respects. That was why the entrance appeared in such a remote place. It was probably prepared to prevent tomb robbers. Moreover, this should not be the only entrance. Based on my deduction, this place is at least 10 miles away from the center of the underground palace. Lei Tongfeng nodded and glanced at the 7th Prince and Crown Prince of the Northern Tribes and Prince Li of the Da Chu State, Mo Jingli, who were also standing at the side. He could not help but frown. Originally, he thought that the treasure map was a secret. However, after finding the place, he realized that everyone had a copy of the so-called treasure map. Lei Tongfeng immediately knew that they had been tricked by Tan Jiji, but this treasure map was obviously real, and they had already found the place. Could it be that Tan Jiji wanted them to kill each other and then reap the benefits of the dispute? Thinking of this, Lei Tongfeng's heart jumped. He was not in a hurry to enter the imperial mausoleum. Smiling at the people around him who were also staring at him, he raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Your Highness, Prince Li, 7th Prince, what do you all plan to do?" Everyone present had different expressions, but they could not help but be wary of their opponents. They were all born in the imperial family, so they naturally knew what they would encounter in the imperial mausoleum. However, if others were to get there first, gold, silver, and jewels were secondary, but if others were to take the imperial jade seal first, then it would really be troublesome. Yelu Hong chuckled, carrying a caution and shrewdness that was different from the nomads of the north. He smiled and said, "This prince is just a little curious. The mausoleum of the founding emperor of the Central Plains has been turned white. Just send someone in to take a look." With a wave of his hand, a group of men dressed as guards standing behind Yelu Hong stepped into the entrance first. Lei Tongfeng narrowed his eyes, a dark light flashing through his eyes. He nodded and smiled. Prince Yelu's words are reasonable. Although the imperial mausoleum is inauspicious, there is no need for us to personally explore it. Forget it, you all go in and take a look. When you go back, you can tell father. Behind him, a group of people dressed in golden brocade robes cupped their fists towards Lei Tongfeng and followed in. Yelu Hong and the others present were stunned. Those were the golden-robed guards of Genom Prince Gojosian. They actually followed Lei Tongfeng out. Lei Tongfeng smiled at Mo Jingli and said, "How about it? Prince Li, are you not going to go in and take a look?" Mo Jingli snorted and said, "A gentleman does not stand on a collapsing wall. A mere imperial mausoleum is nothing in my eyes." With a wave of his hand, the guards standing behind him also followed in. Yelu Yi naturally did not want to fall behind and sent his own men into the imperial mausoleum. In a hidden place far away, Han Mingshi looked at the group of people who were still at the entrance with no intention of going in or leaving. He couldn't help but become angry. What are these people doing? If they don't go in, they will delay others. They won't go in. Han Mingyu, who had been sitting next to him and hadn't spoken until now, suddenly spoke up. Han Mingshi was stunned. He turned to look at Han Mingyu and asked, "Why?" Han Mingyu glanced at him and said indifferently, "Who are those people? If they aren't the crown prince of a country, then they are the son of a prince. They have high positions and power. They are not grave robbers. Even if they want the things inside, they won't personally take the risk. If they lose their lives, they will lose everything." Han Mingshi lowered his head and thought about it. He couldn't help but admit that his older brother's words were very reasonable. At the same time, he became even more depressed and angry. Then what is Mo Xiaoyao's intention? He told me to come here and stare at these people. Is he playing with me? Han Mingyu was silent. He had no interest in Mo Xiaoyao or the people in front of him. He only hoped that his younger brother would not go in and throw his life away. "Young Master Han." A low male voice suddenly appeared not far behind the two of them. Han Mingshi jumped in fright and stood up vigilantly to face the man who had suddenly appeared. The man wore dark green clothes and his face was painted with green dye. Even though Han Mingshi had been standing here for a long time, he couldn't tell what this person looked like after he washed his face clean. He frowned. When he saw that the man was not hostile, Han Mingshi asked, "Who the hell are you?" The man said in a low voice, I am a recruit from Qilin Training Camp's 12th Squad. I am here to tell young Master Han that Qilin is carrying out a mission. Young Master Han, please leave. Mission? Han Mingxi was confused for a moment, but he immediately understood. He pointed at the group of people who were still facing off in the distance and asked, "Them?" The man stood there solemnly, looking down as if he hadn't heard Han Mingxi's question. Han Mingxi narrowed his eyes and looked at him with displeasure. He asked, "If this young master doesn't leave, what will you do?" The man was not polite. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers behind him. "Capture them." Even experts like Han Mingxi and Han Mingyu didn't have time to react. More than a dozen figures leapt forward and sealed Han Mingxi's and his people's pressure points before they were taken away. Han Mingxi had never been treated like this, not even when he had been chased by the major sects of Jianghu when he was young. He was so angry that his face turned red. Even though he was tied behind his back, he continued to struggle. A man behind him walked over and patted his shoulder. He said in a low voice, "Brother Han, you didn't want to cooperate. We didn't have a choice. Don't worry, we'll let you go in at most 4 hours. We are just carrying out Wang Fei's orders. Please don't blame us." Han Mingxi turned his head in grief and anger. He had just said it casually. Who knew that these bastards would be serious? Chapter 490. When he turned around, he realized that the person in front of him, who looked like a ghost, looked extremely familiar. Woo woo. It was Xu Qingfeng. Xu Qingfeng grinned at him. "Brother Han, I'm sorry to offend you. When we're done with the mission, I'll treat you to a drink as an apology." Woo woo. Fuck you. Your Xu family doesn't have any good intentions. Xu Qingfeng pretended not to see the anger in his eyes. He waved his hand and ordered his subordinates to hide the captives so that they wouldn't disturb the characters. And so, for the first time in his life, the elegant and distinguished Sir Feng Yu suffered retribution. Because Han Mingxi and the others were still in the game, there was no way they could send someone to escort them out. Thus, they casually found a secluded cave and placed them there. Then, they chopped some branches and grass to disguise themselves before swaggering off. Only Han Mingxi was left lying in the thicket, cursing in his heart. After dealing with Han Mingxi, Xu Qingfeng contentedly lay on the hillside and observed the movements of the group of people at the entrance of the Imperial Mausoleum. It wasn't that he wanted to go against Han Mingxi, but that Han Mingxi had chosen the right place. It was exactly the place he needed. Facing the group of so-called prince heirs, Xu Qingfeng's eyes were filled with excitement. This kind of life was much more interesting than studying at home or being an official. "Captain, the people outside have all been cleaned up. Only those are left. Do you want to go over now?" One of the team members quietly crept up to Xu Qingfeng and crouched down beside him. Xu Qingfeng shook his head and said in a low voice, "That group of people are all of noble status and are afraid of death. There are at least a few hundred guards around them. And that Lei Tongfeng, Yelu Hong, Yelu Yi, and Mo Jingli are all considered experts. If we let one of them escape, all our previous efforts would be wasted. When the others arrive, we'll act together. We were the first to arrive." "Why?" The young and energetic soldier was unwilling to give up. They were the first to arrive. If they could catch these people themselves, they would be the undisputed first place. Xu Qingfeng raised his hand and slapped him on the forehead. "There are only a dozen of us. It's not easy to deal with so many people face to face. What if one of them got away? Don't forget Princess Consort and Commander Qin's request. Capture or kill all of them. If one escapes, it will be considered a failure." The soldier rubbed his head and lay down obediently. Not long after, something flashed on the opposite hill. Xu Qingfeng's eyes lit up. He bit on the grass and said with a smile, "Look, who's here?" The soldiers got up and looked around carefully. They had chosen a good position. Not only could they see the target in front of them clearly, they could also see the cliffs on both sides of the hill. The soldier chuckled and reported to Xu Qingfeng, "Squads 1 to 16 have arrived. The 7th and 15th teams blocked the upper and lower reaches of the river. The others are scattered around. Shu Qingfeng nodded in satisfaction. Tell the brothers to get ready. Follow the original plan and surround these people with the other pairs of brothers. Push towards the center and don't let anyone get away. After all the squads have gathered, Vice Captain will take command. This captain and the other captains will work together to catch those guys. Yes. Below the cliff, Lei Tongfeng and the others were still carefully probing and guarding against their opponents. They didn't know that a group of people had quietly gotten rid of the thousands of people they had stationed nearby and were slowly approaching them. Lei Tongfeng leaned against a large tree and sat a day. His gaze would occasionally sweep past Yelu Yi and the others. He was calculating in his heart if the person who took out the Imperial Jade Seal in the end wasn't one of his own people. Would the people he brought be enough to take back the Imperial Jade Seal? If it was one of his own people who took the Imperial Jade Seal, how would they escape from the encirclement? While he was thinking about this, the others naturally weren't idle either. So when he raised his head this time, he met Mo Jingli's vigilant gaze. Lei Tongfeng gave Mo Jingli a friendly smile, but was only met with silence and disregard. Lei Tongfeng didn't mind this. He and his father had already analyzed Mo Jingli's character. They both had the same goal and thought that this person wouldn't amount to much and wasn't a cause for concern. Finally, a sound came from the tomb. Everyone immediately stood up and stared nervously at the exit. Very quickly, someone rushed out. His sorry appearance let everyone know that the danger they encountered in the Imperial Mausoleum wasn't ordinary. Mo Jingli stepped forward and grabbed the person he sent in. He asked sternly, "Did you find the Imperial Jade Seal?" "Prince. We were deceived by Tan Jiji. Inside, there's no Imperial Jade Seal inside." The guard grabbed Mo Jingli until it hurt, but he still insisted on reporting. Everyone's expression changed. Very quickly, another person rushed out, but the news they brought back was more or less the same. Yelu Hong's people brought back the fake Imperial Jade Seal, but the word fake at the corner of the Imperial Jade Seal seemed to be mocking them, causing everyone's eyes to hurt. Tan Jiji. Mo Jingli gritted his teeth. Everyone else's expression was just as gloomy. Especially when they heard that although the burial items inside were precious, most of them were large and hard to move. Their expressions became even uglier. Lei Tongfeng was also very straightforward. Since they didn't find anything, he immediately went to Li City to report to his father. He gave a light snort and said clearly, "Let's go. Return to the city." The guards that were originally hidden not far away didn't respond. Lei Tongfeng immediately felt that something was wrong and his expression became even uglier. The others naturally also felt that something was wrong. Mo Jingli said sternly, "Someone come." Only his voice echoed at the bottom of the cliff. The hundreds of guards that were originally hidden in the shadows didn't move at all. Until a clear and low laugh came from not far away, in the northwest, digging up a grave without the owner's permission. "You all have the guts to quickly surrender and wait for the princess consort to deal with you." Mo Jingli sneered and said, "Could it be that this grave belongs to Mo Shouyao?" The other party replied with the same sneer, "Although this grave doesn't belong to the prince, it is still on the prince's land. Also, you are all descendants of the nobles of various countries. To be able to do something as lowly as digging up a grave, it really makes me admire you. But even if you all like to do this kind of thing, you shouldn't do it in the northwest. Do you really think that our prince doesn't exist anymore? I will count to 3, then come over and surrender yourselves. Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite." Lei Tongfeng smiled and said, "I still haven't asked which general you all are under. Could it be Princess Ding's subordinate, Qi Lin? If that's the case, this humble prince would like to experience a thing or two." Yelu Yi stepped forward and said with a smile, "Heir Genom of Gojosian is right. This humble one would also like to experience Qi Lin's skills." Yelu Hong and Mo Jingli exchanged glances and also prepared to face the enemy. Yi Li's subordinate, Qi Lin, had appeared too quickly and too mysteriously. It would be good if they could use this opportunity to probe their background. "Then I'll have to offend you." As soon as the voice fell, more than 10 figures suddenly leapt into the air and pounced on the crowd. They didn't rush forward like normal people and engage in a chaotic battle. Instead, it was as if they had been arranged in advance. Several of them surrounded one person and began to attack. As for the other guards, they were quickly eliminated by the Qi Lin. After the other Qi Lin dealt with the surrounding guards, they didn't step forward to participate in the battle. Instead, they surrounded the dozen people in the battlefield in an orderly manner, as if they were watching the battle and preventing the enemy from escaping. Chapter 491. Lei Tongfeng waved his long sword and fought with the people surrounding him. At the same time, he keenly found that these people cooperated very well and could adjust their formation at any time. Once one group showed a slight weakness, the other two groups would send people to join in. These people were not a match for him in a one-on-one fight, but they were not mediocre. Not to mention 1 against 10, even if 4 people worked together, it would be enough to make him complain inside. The battle ended after the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Without any suspense, all 4 of them were captured. One of them made a hand gesture to the surrounding Kirins, and the surrounding people immediately cheered and scattered in all directions, quickly disappearing into the forest. Lei Tongfeng lowered his head to look at the short knife on his neck and the person who was quietly and neatly tying him up. He sighed helplessly and said, "Qi Lin lives up to its reputation." The person who tied him up stared at the green-faced face and grinned. "Shizzy, thank you for the praise. We are not official Qi Lin." Lei Tongfeng smiled but did not speak. His heart sank. This kind of combat power, no matter which country's army it was, would be the best of the best. These people were not official Qi Lin. Then how strong were the real Qi Lin? Looking at the faces in front of him that he could not see their true faces, Lei Tongfeng couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. "Everyone, what happened to the people we brought?" Yelu Hong asked. One of them made a sound and rubbed his head as he thought. Then he said, "The higher-ups only said that the important people were to be unharmed, the others were to be at ease. The obedient ones were all tied up, the disobedient ones were all killed." Yelu Hong's expression couldn't help but change. The northern tribes were known for their valiance and bravery. They simply couldn't believe that so many northern tribes experts had been killed so quietly. Regarding this, Lei Tongfeng had an idea in his heart and wasn't that excited. He was only calculating in his heart what kind of price he would have to pay if he fell into the hands of Prince Ding and Princess Ding. "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Commander." In a forest with flat terrain, Yi Li, who was dressed in white, stood leisurely without any makeup. Half a step behind him stood the black-clothed Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and Lin Han. Not far away were Han Mingxi, who had just been dragged out of the grass nest, and Han Mingyu, who had a complicated expression on her face. Yi Li looked at the soldiers in front of her who were still in high spirits even after a day and night of marching and fighting. She nodded her head in satisfaction and said, "No need for formalities. I, Commander Qin, and the 3 instructors have all seen your performance today. Let's talk about the shortcomings later. Overall, we are very satisfied." Everyone let out a sigh of relief and said in unison, "Thank you, Princess. Many thanks for the correction." They had not thought that when they had been marching and fighting, Wang Fei, the commander, and the instructors who often trained them had been watching from behind. However, they were still very happy to receive a satisfactory evaluation from Wang Fei. Yi Li smiled as she looked at the excited youths in front of her. She smiled faintly and said, "Then, Ben Fei announces that you have officially left the training camp and become members of Qi Lin." Another wave of cheers came from the troop. Qin Feng, who was standing behind Yi Li, stepped forward and looked maliciously at the excited subordinates. He said, "Don't be happy too early. Truly becoming a member of Qi Lin means that your future days will be more difficult than before. Commander, we are not afraid." A soldier in the troop came forward and said firmly, "Aren't you afraid?" Qin Feng gave him a rare smile. The soldier only felt a chill in his bones. Qin Feng's voice continued, "Then, to welcome and celebrate everyone officially becoming a member of Qi Lin, I have prepared a gift for you. The gift this commander has prepared for everyone is 1 month of wilderness survival. The location is 300 li northeast of Lingyun mountain range. The requirements are that you are not allowed to obtain supplies from civilians in any way, and you are not allowed to alert the garrisoned troops. Losers. Qin Feng smiled without a change in expression when he saw the originally excited expressions turn into tears. He said, "Losers will wash the clothes of all of Qi Lin in the next 3 months. Everyone instantly cursed in their hearts. Qi Lin had to train endlessly every day. Their clothes were so dirty that they didn't even want to touch them. There were at least 700 or 800 people in Qi Lin. They would rather die than wash so many clothes." Qin Feng obviously couldn't understand the pain and resentment of his subordinates. He looked satisfactorily at the soldiers whose faces were covered with oil paint, but whose resentment could be clearly seen. He waved his hand and said, "Now, everyone. Set out from the northeast." "Yes. Captain of Squad 12, stay here," Yi Li said. Xu Qingfeng, who had originally planned to run with them, stilled and stayed where he was. "Wang Fei," Xu Qingfeng said in confusion. "Third brother, your training is over," Yi Li said with a smile. Xu Qingfeng knew that when Yi Li called him third brother, it meant that they had a personal relationship. But Xu Qingfeng did not want to treat this as a personal matter. After a moment of silence, Xu Qingfeng said, "Wang Fei, I want to stay with them." Yi Li frowned and said, "We did not originally say this." Xu Qingfeng had joined halfway. Even though his training results were not worse than the others, from the beginning, no one had planned on keeping him in Qi Lin. Even Xu Qingfeng himself probably did not have this plan. Originally, he wanted to be on the battlefield, not on such a small team. Qi Lin was fated not to be able to face the battlefield directly. Also, because of the confidentiality of Qi Lin, if Xu Qingfeng really joined Qi Lin, it meant that he would not be able to marry and have children for at least a few years. He would also not be able to interact with his family for a long time. This was probably not what uncle and aunt wanted to see. Xu Qingfeng said seriously, "I have made up my mind. I do not think I am worse than anyone else. Wang Fei, please give me a chance to prove it." Yi Li frowned slightly and looked at Qin Feng to ask, "Qin Feng, what do you think?" Qin Feng raised an eyebrow and said, "Third Master Shu's ability is unquestionable. Actually, Wang Fei can wait for Third Master Shu to return before deciding whether to stay or leave. There is also time to discuss with old teacher Shu and the 2 masters." Yi Li thought for a moment and nodded, "All right then, third brother, you can go first." Xu Qingfeng heard this and his face lit up with joy. He bowed to Yi Li and Qin Feng before turning to chase after his own team. Reporting to Prince, bad news. In the inn in Glass City, a servant knocked on Genom of Gojosian's door with a panicked expression. Not long after, the door opened from the inside. Genom of Gojosian stood at the door with a gloomy expression. He stared at the panicked servant in front of him and asked coldly, "What happened?" The servant panted heavily and stammered, "Your Highness. Something happened to Your Highness. Your Highness has been captured by the people from the Prince Ding mansion." Genom of Gojosian's heart sank. His subordinates naturally would not speak without thinking. However, in the past 2 days, he had not heard of any movement of troops in or near Glass City. How could Tungfeng? What else is there? Tell me everything, Genom of Gojosian said in a low voice. Chapter 492. The attendant hurriedly said, "We have lost contact with all the people who went out with the Crown Prince. I heard that this morning, Princess Ding personally escorted a group of people back to the mansion. The servants reported that they saw the Crown Prince of the Northern Tribes, the 7th Prince, and Prince Li of Eastern Chu." Genom of Gojosian frowned. What does the Prince Ding mansion want to do after capturing so many people? Genom of Gojosian did not believe that the Prince Ding mansion wanted to start a war with the other countries. No matter how powerful the Mohist army was, they would not be able to withstand the combined attack of the 3 countries. Just as he was thinking about the purpose of this trip to the Prince Ding mansion, someone sent an invitation. Prince Ding, Princess Ding invites the prince to the mansion for a chat." Genom of Gojosian took the invitation and said calmly, I understand. You may leave. After dismissing the servant, the attendant standing by the side asked carefully, Prince, are we going? Genom of Gojosian looked at the elegant invitation in his hand and sneered, Tungfeng is in their hands. How can we not go? In the Prince Ding mansion, Han Mingxi was complaining to Yi Li about what happened to him yesterday. Yi Li smiled at his indignant expression and said, Mingxi, it's all a misunderstanding. I'll apologize to you on their behalf. Is that not enough? Han Mingxi glanced at Mo Xiaoyao, who was calmly drinking tea. He snorted and muttered, What misunderstanding? Someone is clearly plotting against me. He clearly knew that Qi Lin's people wanted to capture people, yet he still told him that he could go there to make a fortune. He clearly had bad intentions. He was also an idiot. He actually believed that Mo Xiaoyao would give him directions to make money. Mo Xiaoyao clearly only knew how to exploit him. Yi Li covered her mouth and laughed, Mingxi, this is really a misunderstanding. I made the decision to hire Qi Lin at the last minute. Even Prince doesn't know about it. Han Mingxi knew that Yi Li wouldn't lie to him about such a trivial matter, so he just snorted and admitted that he was unlucky. Mo Xiaoyao put down his teacup and looked at him with raised eyebrows. Even so, didn't you also get quite a lot? What is there to complain about? The people that Lei Tungfeng and the others sent in could be said to have helped them remove most of the traps in the imperial mausoleum. Later on, they entered the Prince Ding mansion without any obstacles. Naturally, Han Mingxi had also benefited a lot from this. Han Mingxi thought about the various treasures, antiques, gold, silver, and jewelry that he had just brought home from outside, and the anger in his heart subsided. He stared vigilantly at Mo Xiaoyao and said, Those things are all mine. Don't even think about getting your hands on them. Mo Xiaoyao didn't comment. If he really wanted them, would he have to worry about not being able to get the things in Han Mingxi's hands? There was no need to argue with Han Mingxi in front of Li Shu Qingchen, who was sitting on the side and watching the show, saw that they had finished arguing. He smiled and said, Li what do you plan to do with the people you captured? Those people were all important figures in the various countries. It was because of this that it was troublesome to deal with them. Yi Li smiled and said, What does Big Brother think? Shu Qingchen casually played with the beautiful jade at his waist. He thought for a moment and said, I don't think Li has any intention of doing anything to them. In the end, I'm afraid we'll have to let them go. The key is how we'll let them go, and how many benefits will we get? Yi Li smiled and said, It's good that Big Brother knows. We don't expect to get many benefits. This time, we're just planning to send these people out of the Northwest in one go. They've been in the Northwest for a long time. A look of understanding flashed across Shu Qingchen's face. This time, they had made such a big move because they wanted to intimidate the powers in the Northwest and make them not dare to act rashly. He nodded and said, I know. I'll tell father and second uncle when I get back. Yi Li nodded and said, Then I'll have to trouble Big Brother and uncle to negotiate with the various countries. Reporting to Wang Fei, Genom of Gojosian has arrived. The guard outside the door reported. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao looked at each other and smiled. Mo Xiaoyao stood and said, He came quickly. Li, let's go see Genom of Gojosian. It's better that I talk to Genom of Gojosian personally. Yi Li also agreed. Although Genom of Gojosian was only a prince, he was different from other people. He had the most direct influence on the Xi Ling. Because the entire Xi Ling was under his control. This kind of person was naturally more difficult to deal with than the Prince of the Northern Tribes or Prince Li of Da State. When the two of them arrived at the main hall, there was not a single person in the hall. Instead, there were sounds of fighting coming from outside. When they stepped out of the main hall, they saw two figures fighting in the courtyard. It was Genom of Gojosian and Ling Taihan exchanging blows. It had already attracted the attention of many passers-by. When Ling Taihan fought, there was nothing wrong with him. If you lost an arm, he would give you a step back. If you lost an arm, it was because you didn't have the ability. Therefore, when he attacked, the power of his palms could topple mountains and overturn seas. Yi Li leaned against Mo Xiaoyao's side and watched the two fighting intensely. She asked softly, "If you were to fight with Ling Tai-han, are you confident that you could win?" Mo Xiaoyao was focused on the situation in front of him. After a long time, he replied in a low voice, "No." Ling Tai-han's aptitude, comprehension, and diligence are not lacking at all. He has been training hard all these years. If it weren't for these 10 years of injuries, I might be able to beat him. If it were now, I'm afraid I would be slightly inferior. Mo Xiaoyao's talent was indeed rare in the world. However, no matter how good his talent was, it could not withstand these 10 years of exhaustion. In fact, for Mo Xiaoyao to be able to maintain his martial arts to this level, it was already unknown how much sweat and hard work he had put in. Right now, Ling Tai-han can be said to be the world's #1 expert without a doubt. Mo Xiaoyao sighed softly as he watched the two fight. "You're saying?" Yi Li was startled. Mo Xiaoyao continued, "Genom of Gojosian is not Ling Tai-han's opponent, and Mu Qingcang is even less so." Mo Xiaoyao also admitted that he was inferior to Ling Tai-han. Ling Tai-han was indeed the world's #1 expert without a doubt. As expected, in a situation where Ling Tai-han did not show any mercy and Genom of Gojosian was clearly not in his best condition, Genom of Gojosian quickly began to show signs of defeat. However, Ling Tai-han clearly did not have any intention of stopping, and continued to relentlessly attack. Seeing this, Yi Li could not help but observe a moment of silence for Genom of Gojosian. Her original intention of inviting Genom of Gojosian to the Prince Ding mansion today was definitely not for Ling Tai-han to teach him a lesson. She only wanted this matter to end quickly. Everything was just a coincidence. Ling Tai-han is so ruthless no matter who he fights with? Yi Li asked with a frown. Thinking of the previously arranged match between Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Tai-han, she could not help but feel a little worried. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and reached out to pull her into his arms. Ignoring the sidelong glances of the onlookers, he laughed softly and said, "Ling Tai-han is not an idiot. If he really wants to fight me to the death, even if I end up worse off, he won't be any better off." The difference in strength between them was not to the point where Ling Tai-han could one-sidedly suppress him. If he performed above his usual level, it would be hard to tell who would win. If Ling Tai-han wanted to fight him to the death, it would only result in a lose-lose situation for both sides. Moreover, don't think that they are fighting so fiercely. Ling Tai-han is not using his full strength, and Enchanting is also holding back. Yi Li pointed at Genom of Gojosian, whose movements had clearly slowed down after being hit by a palm, and asked, "Are you hinting that Ling Tai-han and Enchanting have a personal grudge?" Chapter 493. Mo Xiaoyao smiled but did not speak. Ling Tai-han had already lost interest in Enchanting's martial arts. If he didn't have a personal grudge, why would he attack when he heard that Enchanting had come to the Prince Ding mansion? When the show was almost over, Mo Xiaoyao thought that he couldn't let a guest of the Prince Ding mansion be killed in the mansion. He laughed loudly and said, "Genom of Gojosian, Pavilion Masterling, since the sparring is almost over, why don't we all stop?" Ling Tai-han swept a glance over and then took a step back. He landed on the top of the wall and looked down at Genom of Gojosian. Compared to Ling Tai-han's elegance, Genom of Gojosian appeared to be in a difficult situation. There was a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. He pressed one hand against his chest that had been hit by Ling Tai-han's palm. His expression was heavy. He turned to look at Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao, who were watching from the side. He said in a heavy voice, "Prince Ding, Princess Ding, what is the meaning of this?" Yi Li took a step forward and said with a faint smile, "Genom of Gojosian, please forgive us. Pavilion Master Ling has been a guest at the Fu these days. Please forgive us for our lack of manners. Pavilion Master Ling, if you don't want to drink, why don't we have a cup of tea?" Ling Tai-han raised a fist in a salute to Yi Li. He laughed loudly and said, "I was just passing by and saw Genom of Gojosian come in. I was itching to spar. Please forgive me, Wang Fei." Yi Li nodded and smiled, "Pavilion Master Ling, take care." Ling Tai-han nodded at Mo Xiaoyao, then flew out of the front courtyard. After inviting Genom of Gojosian into the main hall to take a seat, Yi Li looked at Genom of Gojosian, who had an ugly expression on his face, and asked, "Prince, do you need a doctor to come over and take a look?" Genom of Gojosian gave a light snort and wiped the blood from his lips. "Many thanks, Wang Fei. It's just a small wound." Yi Li nodded. It seemed that the wound was not serious. Although Yi Li did not know why Ling Taihan would suddenly step in and start a feud with Genom of Gojosian, she did not object to the current outcome. A Genom of Gojosian with internal injuries was clearly more beneficial to their interests than a Genom of Gojosian without any injuries. Letting the servant girls serve tea and leave, Genom of Gojosian looked at Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li. He asked straightforwardly, "I heard that Go is a guest in the Wang Fu. Can he come out and meet us?" Mo Xiaoyao's brows rose. His snow-white hair made his smile appear cold and emotionless. "Guest? Li, have you invited Genom of Gojosian to the Fu as a guest?" Yi Li shook her head and gave a faint smile. "I left the city the day before yesterday to inspect the Qilin station and only came back this morning. Why would I invite Genom of Gojosian to be a guest?" Hearing this, Genom of Gojosian's heart sank. He also understood why Lei Tungfeng had silently fallen into Princess Ding's hands even though he had brought so many people with him. Qilin, the strongest troop under Princess Ding's command. No one had actually seen them before. The only thing they knew was their valiant battle record. Genom of Gojosian frowned slightly. He took out the invitation he had received and asked, "Then, what is the meaning of this invitation from Prince and Princess Consort? What is the purpose of inviting I to the Fu?" Mo Xiaoyao leaned against the armrest and gave a faint smile. "It's not a big deal. In a few days, I and Princess Consort will be inspecting the Northwest and will not be in Glass City. That's why I wanted to inform His Highness, so that there won't be any lack of hospitality." Genom of Gojosian looked down and thought for a while before smiling. "I see. Actually, I and Quan have already left Xiling for almost 2 months. We have been busy with domestic affairs and had the intention to leave. It's just that Quan went out yesterday and did not return. I'm afraid we will have to trouble Prince and Princess Consort." Mo Xiaoyao promised generously, "Genom of Gojosian, don't worry. As long as the Crown Prince is still in my Northwest territory, even if he hides in a hole, I can find him for you." Genom of Gojosian's heart sank. After talking for a long time, Mo Xiaoyao seemed to have promised, but in reality, he did not promise anything. He was captured by Mo Xiaoyao. This was something everyone knew. But as long as Mo Xiaoyao did not admit it, no one could do anything to him. Furthermore, he promised to search for Quan. He would search for him for 10 days to half a month, or even 3 to 5 years. The Prince Ding mansion could afford this time, but Xiling and Zhennan Palace could not. Even though Teng Feng was not his only son, he was the only one with outstanding talent. No matter what, he could not fall into Mo Xiaoyao's hands. Raising his head, Genom of Gojosian said in a low voice, "My son is not sensible. If he has offended Prince and Princess Consort in any way, I will apologize on his behalf. I hope Prince Ding will be magnanimous." Saying this was showing weakness. Mo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed slightly. He smiled faintly and said, "Prince, your words are too serious. I seem to remember, when Princess Li went out of the city yesterday, she encountered many mysterious people who suddenly appeared in the Northwest, so she ordered people to capture them." "Princess Li?" Yi Li smiled gently and nodded. "Yesterday, many people were captured." "Zhuojing?" Zhuojing thought for a while and nodded. There was indeed someone who called himself Crown Prince Genom of Gojosian. But I am familiar with him and am not familiar with Genom of Gojosian. Furthermore, Genom of Gojosian was staying in the courier station. Why would he go near Hongju? I thought he must be a swindler, so I ordered people to imprison him as well. Zhuojing's straightforward words, coupled with his cold, stern, and handsome face, immediately made him seem righteous, as if he was telling the truth. Everyone present was an expert at acting. Mo Xiaoyao sat up and reprimanded him softly. "Crown Prince Genom of Gojosian, how can you be so casual about such an important matter? Why aren't you going to investigate?" Go and come back quickly. Zhuo Jing responded and immediately retreated to investigate. After Zhuo Jing's figure disappeared from the door, Mo Xiaoyao picked up his tea and took a sip. He smiled at Genom of Gojosian and said, "Prince, don't be anxious. Zhuo Jing is one of Princess Li's people. He is usually very reliable when it comes to handling matters. This was a moment of carelessness. I think we will be able to figure out the whole story very soon." How could Genom of Gojosian not see that Mo Xiaoyao was acting? But his son was in the hands of others, so naturally he would listen to whatever they said. He smiled faintly and said, "Then I will have to trouble Prince Ding." Zhuo Jing left quickly and returned quickly. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Zhuo Jing reappeared at the door of the main hall. Stepping into the main hall, Zhuo Jing stepped forward and bowed to Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao. He opened his mouth to ask for forgiveness. This subordinate has failed in his duty. Please forgive me, Princess Consort and Prince. Just now this subordinate went to the prison to investigate. That is indeed Crown Prince Genom of Gojosian. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, "If that's the case, why don't you ask the Crown Prince to come out?" Zhuo Jing said awkwardly this. "If you have something to say, just say it." Yi Li said. Zhuo Jing said, "After we capture those people, we will hand them over to young Master Feng San." Young Master Feng San said that he hates people who steal tombs and dig tombs the most. Young Master Feng San said that according to the law, those who steal tombs should be flogged 100 times and exiled to the border. According to the law, those who steal tombs should be executed. If a prince breaks the law, he will be punished the same as a commoner. Therefore, young Master Feng San is unwilling to hand over the criminals to this subordinate. This subordinate has failed in his duty. Please forgive me, Princess Consort. Looking at Genom of Gojosian, who was sitting on the side with a green face, Yi Li smiled apologetically and said, "Feng San has participated in the drafting of the laws of Li City and the Northwest under the prince's orders. As the saying goes, a new broom sweeps clean 3 times. It is inevitable that he is a bit slow in thinking. Please forgive me, Prince." She turned to Zhuo Jing and said, "Ask Feng San to come over." "There is no need to. This subordinate, Feng San, requests to see the prince consort." Before Yi Li finished speaking, Feng Jiao's voice came from outside the door. Young Master Feng San was still dressed in red. His elegant bearing made him look like a noble young master. Yi Li said, "Feng San, is Crown Prince Genom of Gojosian in your hands?" Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows and smiled. He leisurely waved the fan in his hand and said, "Reporting to Princess Consort, this subordinate does not have any crown prince in my hands. This subordinate has come to report this matter to Princess Consort Prince. In this subordinate's opinion, these people are daring enough to steal tombs and should be executed. This subordinate suggests that these people be executed in public and their crimes announced to the world." Chapter 494. Genom of Gojosian's expression was extremely ugly. If Crown Prince Genom of Gojosian was really beheaded for grave robbing, then Zhennan Palace and the West Hill would really lose face. However, Feng Jiao still made it sound so dignified that no one could refute him. Because grave robbing was indeed a crime, whether it was in the West Hill or in the Dhu state. But to put it bluntly, this crime was actually targeted at ordinary people and grave robbers. Even if the royal family dug up the tombs of the previous dynasty, who could do anything about it? But now that Lei Tongfeng was in the hands of Mo Xiaoyao, this crime was something that no one could do anything about. Feng Jiao continued his impassioned speech. The Northwest has just been established, and the code of law is not complete yet. It should be punished severely as a warning to others. Moreover, grave robbing is a serious crime that ignores human ethics and disturbs the spirits of the dead. Although it is the imperial tomb of the previous dynasty, if it is not punished severely, it will inevitably give the impression that the Northwest has no human ethics. "Prince, please reconsider." Genom of Gojosian sighed deeply in his heart, knowing that he was going to fall today no matter what. He stood up and saluted Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao. My son acted recklessly and committed such a heinous crime. Prince Ding and Princess, please forgive him. The West Hill and Zhennan Palace are willing to do all we can to compensate the Prince Ding mansion and the Northwest. Hearing this, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao looked at each other and smiled knowingly. It was a good thing that he was willing to admit defeat. In the end, the matter of Lei Tongfeng was satisfactorily resolved by Genom of Gojosian's compromise, which included the signing of a 5-year truce agreement between the West Hill and the Mohist army, as well as the establishment of trade between the West Hill and the Northwest and the establishment of a direct trade route to the Western region. Furthermore, the West Hill would sell a certain amount of copper and iron ore to the Northwest at a low price every year as compensation for Lei Tongfeng's actions in the Northwest. After coming to the Northwest, it could be said that the South Guarding King didn't gain anything at all. Early the next morning, he left Glass City with Lei Tongfeng and returned to the Western Tomb. However, less than half of the troops that had originally come were left when they returned. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao did not ask how the Crown Prince and 7th Prince of the Northern Tribes and Da Chu State's King Li were going to negotiate, and left it to Xu Qingchen and Xu Hongyu to handle. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao were very confident in the abilities of the two of them. Naturally, they were not worried that they would cause the Mo family army to suffer. After Genom of Gojosian left, Ling Taihan and his sister, who were staying at the Prince Ding mansion, also left together. Although the sickly scholar, who had not recovered from his illness, still looked as pale as before, his breathing seemed to be much better than before. Ling Taihan and Lung Liuyu still seemed to be strangely stiff, but that had nothing to do with Yi Li. In a few days, Xu Qingchen and Xu Hongyu had settled the remaining people. This time, the Mohist army had not only obtained numerous substantial benefits, but also made the nobles of the various countries understand a principle. Even if the Mohist army now only occupied less than 1/6 of the Da Chu state's territory, they were still not to be offended. Ever since Mo Xiaoyao announced that he was cutting ties with the Da Chu state, the shaky balance between the various countries was once again maintained. Reporting to Wang Fei, Li Wang and Li Wangfei have come to bid farewell to Wang Fei. After sending away a large group of troublesome people, Yi Li was free and played with Mo Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao, who had been pregnant for almost 2 months, had become even more adorable. His white and chubby little face had 2 large black crystal eyes. Every time he looked at Yi Li with those watery eyes, she couldn't help but hug him and kiss him. Hearing Qing Luan's report, Yi Li sat up and raised an eyebrow as she asked, "Bid farewell to me?" How come she didn't know that in the eyes of outsiders, she, the Princess Ding, was more important than Prince Ding? If it was because of her relationship with Yi Ying, then from the beginning to the end, she and Yi Ying had never had a sisterly relationship. Qing Luan nodded and said, "Li Wangfei did say that." Prince and second young Master Shu left the city early in the morning. They probably won't be able to come back in time to send Li Wang off. Yi Li smiled. Mo Xiaoyao clearly knew that Mo Jingli was leaving today. If he had the intention to send him off, he wouldn't have left the city. Thinking about it, Yi Li waved her hand and said, "Forget it, Li Wang and Wang Fei can wait in the reception pavilion." Qing Luan accepted the order and left. Yi Li changed her clothes before turning to leave. Before she walked out of the inner room, Mo Xiaobao, who was behind her, started to cry out. No one could understand what he was saying. Hearing the sound, Yi Li turned back to look. The little meatball was lying in his swaddling clothes. He reached out his little hand and smiled cutely at Yi Li. His little mouth kept babbling in a language that no one else could understand. Mother Lin smiled and said, "Little Shizzy is afraid that he can't bear to part with Wang Fei." Yi Li looked at Bao Bao's expression and felt very guilty. Bao Bao had been born for almost 2 months, but she didn't spend much time with him. Sometimes, not seeing him for 1 or 2 days was common. It was rare that Mo Xiaobao could still smile at her so intimately every time he saw her. Carefully carrying Bao Bao out of the cradle, Yi Li smiled gently and said, "Bao Bao, be good. Go out with Nyang Qin, okay?" Although it was only the 8th month, the weather in the northwest was already cold. When Mother Lin heard that Yi Li wanted to carry Mo Xiaobao out, She hurriedly added a soft and warm blanket over him. She carefully reminded Yi Li not to let the little heir catch a cold from the cold wind. Yi Li complied and carried Mo Xiaobao out of the room. Yi Li carried Mo Xiaobao into the parlor but only saw Mo Jingli sitting in the parlor in a daze. Yi Ying was nowhere to be seen. Yi Li frowned in displeasure. Calling the servant girl who was standing at the door, she asked, "Where did Li Wangfei go?" The servant girl respectfully replied, reporting to Wangfei, Li Wangfei said that she wanted to go out for a walk and went to the garden. "Newbie will go invite her over now?" Yi Li nodded but was stopped by Mo Jingli who had stood up. "Wait a moment, there's no need to call Ying Er. Yi Li, I have something to discuss with you alone." Yi Li turned to look at the man who was still looking at her with a cold and arrogant expression. She found it funny. Waving her hand to dismiss the servant girl, Yi Li stepped into the hall and asked, "What does Li Wang want to discuss with Ben Fei?" Mo Jingli frowned as he looked at Mo Xiaobao in Yi Li's arms and Wei Lin and Qing Yu who were following behind Yi Li. He said in displeasure, "I want to discuss with you alone." Yi Li looked at him in confusion. "There are no outsiders right now. If you have something to say, just say it." Mo Jingli also understood that Yi Li would not be alone with him. He could only swallow his anger and sit back down. Yi Li sat down on the main seat and carefully placed Mo Xiaobao in her arms. She lightly touched his little hand, causing Mo Xiaobao to giggle and reveal a toothless smile. This warm scene between mother and son was an eyesore in Mo Jingli's eyes. He gave a soft snort and looked at Yi Li to say, "I was wrong to break off the engagement. I apologize to you here." Yi Li stilled and looked in confusion at the solemn Mo Jingli. She turned to look at Wei Lin and Qing Yu. Was Mo Jingli's brain damaged? Wei Lin and Qing Yu also looked like they had seen a ghost. This was not the first day they knew Li Wang. If it was said that he would play some dirty tricks, they would believe it. But if it was said that he would apologize in person, no one had ever seen him do it before. Seeing the disbelieving expressions of the three, Mo Jingli's expression became even uglier. Yi Li was not in the mood to talk about the past with him. She just wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. So she gave a faint smile and nodded, saying, "It's already in the past. Li Wang does not need to mind it." Mo Jingli looked seriously at her and said, "How can I not mind it? I've already investigated the matter in the past. It was Yi Ying who deliberately ruined your reputation in order to enter Li Wang Fu. If it wasn't for this, you would be Li Wang Fei right now." Yi Li instantly felt speechless. At the same time, she felt that she was stupid to think that Mo Jingli would change after experiencing so many things in the past 2 years. Chapter 495. King Li, I think there is a problem that you have never thought of. If I am not willing to break off the engagement, do you really think that the engagement will be broken off so easily? That was the engagement that the late emperor had personally bestowed. How could it be broken off so easily? What do you mean? Mo Jingli looked at Yi Li with dissatisfaction. From Yi Li's words, he could naturally hear the disdain towards him. Yi Li gently hugged Mo Xiaobao and said with a faint smile, "Nothing much. This consort just wants to tell Your Highness King Li that what has happened has already happened. There are no IFS in this world and there is nothing that should happen. If King Li does not have any other matters, then please leave. Prince is leaving the city for business this morning and will not be sending King Li and Princess Consort off." Mo Jingli unwillingly stared at Yi Li and said, "You are I's Princess Consort." Yi Li raised her eyes and looked at him indifferently. "Then what does Your Highness want? You come with I and I guarantee that you will become King Li's Princess Consort," Mo Jingli said. Yi Li calmly looked at Mo Jingli for a long time before she sneered in disdain. Sensing the disdain and contempt in Yi Li's laughter, Mo Jingli said with a bit of anger and embarrassment, "What are you laughing at?" Yi Li stopped smiling and calmly asked, "Your Highness King Li, do you dare to take me away from Glass City?" Hearing this, Mo Jingli's expression changed. She quickly glanced at Wei Lin, who was standing behind Yi Li, and her face turned green and white. Yi Li leisurely leaned back in the chair and hugged Mo Xiaobao while teasing him. she said with a smile. What does King Li mean by saying this? Or is it that King Li's courage and daring have reached the point where you dare to steal Princess Ding in the northwest? If it is really like this, then this consort will have a whole new level of respect for you. But even if it is like this, why should this consort go with you? Princess Li? Does this consort care if it's very valuable? Mo Jingli clenched his fists tightly and stared at Yi Li. Is Mo Xiaoyao that good to you? You'd rather follow him regardless of everything? He's just using you. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said with a faint smile, Xiaoyao is naturally good to me. Who in the world doesn't know that I am his only wife, that I am in charge of the Prince Ding mansion and half of the Mohist army, and that I am in charge of the most mysterious and elite Qilin in the world? These, can you give them to me? Do you dare to give it to me? Could it be that Prince Li doesn't want to use me? Don't you want the Yunju Shu clan behind me? Don't you want my Qilin? Having been mercilessly exposed, Mo Jingli's expression turned ugly. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, the Mohist army can be said to be the enemy of the entire world. Yi Li, I am doing this for your own good. Don't be ungrateful. Yi Li said indifferently, this consort appreciates Prince Li's kindness. Prince Li has also waited for a long time. The two of you should leave as soon as possible. This consort won't see you off. Everyone turned their eyes to the door. Yi Ying had appeared at the door at some point and was staring at them with a strange expression. Mo Jingli's face flashed with a trace of uneasiness. He stood up and said, Ying when did you come back? Yi Ying stared at him for a long time before saying indifferently, just now. Your Highness, now that you've said your goodbyes to third sister, shouldn't we set off now? Mo Jingli looked at Yi Li with some reluctance, but saw that Yi Li was playing with the baby in her arms. He nodded and said, let's go. Without saying goodbye to Yi Li, he walked past Yi Ying and left. Yi Ying looked back at Yi Li and said with a complicated expression, third sister, goodbye. Yi Li nodded and said quietly, I won't see you off. After Yi Ying walked out of the door, Yi Li sighed softly. Qing Yu, who was serving beside her, comforted her softly. Prince Li has always been self-righteous. Why should Princess be angry with him? Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, I'm not angry with him. I'm just a little emotional. When Yi Ying was still in the boudoir, she was so proud and spoiled. But now. Actually, when Mo Jingli said that Yi Li would become Prince Li's Di Fei, Yi Ying was already outside the door. If it was in the past, Yi Ying would have cried and made a fuss. But now, when faced with this kind of problem, Yi Ying had learned to remain silent. It seemed that there was no one in this world who would never change. Qing Yu said with a smile, in the past, fourth young miss was the daughter of the minister, the younger sister of the Jowie. She was also a famous beauty in the capital. Naturally, she was insufferably arrogant. Moreover, Prince Li was only an ordinary prince at that time. But now, Prince Li occupies half of the most prosperous part of the Da Chu state and is on par with the emperor. The Yi family has long declined. How could fourth young miss dare to make a fuss with Prince Li? The Prince Li of today is no longer the Prince Li of the past who always favors fourth young miss. Yi Li smiled. Wasn't that so? Mo Jingli even brought Princess Shi Xia to the northwest. It could be seen that Yi Ying's position in his heart was just SOSO. If it wasn't for her relationship with Yi Ying and the fact that she gave birth to a son for Mo Jingli, she would have been thrown to some corner by Mo Jingli. After the various countries' envoys left, Glass City gradually regained its peace. But at the same time, many merchants came to Glass City and even the entire northwest to settle down. Many of the citizens who had fled to the Great Pass to escape the disaster of war gradually moved back. The entire northwest, under the efforts of the Prince Ding mansion, did not become chaotic because of the sudden announcement of breaking off relations with the Da Chu state. Instead, it gradually got on the right track. When Yi Li finally let out a sigh of relief, Shu Qingze and Qin Zheng's wedding date finally arrived. Although Shu Qingze was the first person in the Shu family to get married in this generation, the Shu family, from Mr. Qingyun to Shu Qingze and Qin Zheng, emphasized that the wedding should be simple. Qin Zheng became General Zhong Qilan's godfather and got married from General Zhong's residence. For Qin Zheng's wedding, Murong Ting, who was originally far away in the Da Chu state, also left Lung Haoyu and hurried over, just in time for Qin Zheng's wedding. In General Zhong's residence, in the boudoir specially prepared for Qin Zheng, Yi Li and Murong Ting looked at Qin Zheng, who had just changed into a bright red wedding dress and looked particularly beautiful and dazzling. Murong Ting pulled Qin Zheng and praised, "Fortunately, I made it in time. Otherwise, I would have missed Zheng Er's beautiful and moving moment. I'm really moved. I'm afraid that second young Master Shu, that blockhead, will be dumbfounded." Murong. Qin Zheng blushed and glared at Murong Ting coquettishly. The red wedding dress made her look even more delicate than flowers. For Shu Qingze and Qin Zheng's wedding, Yi Li, who usually wore plain clothes, also changed into a bright yellow dress embroidered with hibiscus branches. Standing in front of Qin Zheng, she looked at her and nodded with a smile. Murong is right. Indeed, people are more delicate than flowers. Second brother is really lucky to be able to marry sister Zheng Er. Qin Zheng looked at the two of them helplessly and said unwillingly, "Li even you are teasing me." Yi Li quickly covered her mouth and laughed. "I don't dare. After today, Zheng Er will be my second sister-in-law. How would I dare to tease second sister-in-law? Isn't that right, sister-in-law?" There was a burst of cheerful laughter in the boudoir. Murong Ting turned around and took out a large sandalwood box from her luggage and handed it to Qin Zheng. Qin Zheng looked at her in confusion. "This is..." Murong Ting said, "Before I left, Madam Qin sent someone to send it over. She said that she left in a hurry and didn't do anything. She didn't even give you a dowry. Madam Qin and Lord Qin personally arranged these. They said that they were your dowry." The originally joyful atmosphere in the boudoir gradually faded. Qin Zheng held the box and tears immediately fell. Murong Ting immediately panicked and hurriedly took out her handkerchief to wipe Qin Zheng's tears. Today is your good day. How can you cry?" I didn't want to make you cry. Li Unable to persuade Qin Zheng, Murong Ting could only look helplessly at Yi Li. She really didn't want to make Qin Zheng cry, but the dowry from the Qin family must be handed over to Zheng Er before the ceremony. Chapter 496. Yi Li walked to Qin Zheng's side and sat down. She patted her shoulder and comforted her softly. "Sister Zheng Er, don't ruin your makeup. Lord Qin and Madam Qin want Murong to send the dowry from afar. It's their love. You should be happy." Qin Zheng nodded repeatedly, but how could her tears be stopped so easily? Yi Li sighed and patted Qin Zheng. "Forget it. If you want to cry, cry to your heart's content. After you're done crying, we'll put on more beautiful makeup. But don't cry until your eyes are swollen. It'll be terrible if you scare my second brother." Phut. Hearing Yi Li's comforting words, Murong Ting couldn't help but burst out laughing. She glared at Yi Li and said, "Li, are you comforting Zheng Er or telling a joke?" Even Qin Zheng couldn't help but laugh. Her beautiful face was a bit embarrassed. In front of Yi Li and Murong Ting, Qin Zheng carefully opened the box that represented her parents' intentions. Lord Qin and Madam Qin were very thoughtful. The main thing was that the mountain was high and the road was long. Murong Ting couldn't bring too many things. So the most in the box was banknotes. In addition to 2 banknotes worth 10,000 taels, there were nearly 1,000 taels of banknotes and silver fragments. In addition, there were 3 small boxes full of all kinds of jewelry. With these, even if Qin Zheng didn't do anything, it was enough for her to have enough clothes and food for the rest of her life. Qin Zheng hugged the box, her clear eyes filled with tears. She said softly, "Father and mother have done so much for me. Unfortunately, I'm unfilial, even getting married. Silly. As long as you're well, Uncle Qin and Auntie will naturally be at ease. One day, the family will be reunited." Yi Li said. Murong Ting nodded and said, "That's right. After your wedding, I still have to return to the capital. At that time, write a letter and I'll help you bring it back to Uncle Qin and Auntie Qin. Don't worry, We will naturally take care of the two elders in the capital. Qin Zheng nodded and wiped her tears. She said with some shame, "Thank you, Li Er and Murongting." Murongting smiled and said, "What are you thanking us for? Aren't we friends?" Yi Li laughed and said, "All right, heroine Murong, your friend is about to go overboard. Go and add these things to the dowry list. Just say that it's a dowry from Zheng Er's parents." Qin Zheng's dowry was prepared by the general's mansion. Yi Li and the Prince Ding mansion had also sent a lot of dowry, which was not thin. But in the end, the dowry given by the biological parents had a different meaning. Mu Rongting had just made Qin Zheng cry and was eager to have something for her to do. She took the list from Yi Li and hurriedly turned to do it. The two of them smiled as they watched Mu Rongting leave happily. They couldn't help but smile at each other. The sadness from before had also faded a lot. The groom is here to escort the bride. The bride is going out. The bridesmaid's joyful voice came from outside the door. Yi Li lowered her head to check Qin Zheng's makeup. She personally took the red veil and covered Qin Zheng with it. "Zheng I wish you happiness." "Thank you," Qin Zheng said softly. After Qin Zheng and Shu Qing's wedding, Glass City seemed to have completely calmed down. In the outside world, no matter how much the northern militants Yelu Hong and Yelu Yi fought openly and secretly, or how Mo Jingqi and Mo Jingli were at odds on the surface, or how Genom of Gojosian's seemingly stable rule and the Emperor of Shilling's clan were restless, it did not affect the peace of the Northwest. With the protection of hundreds of thousands of Mohist army and Prince Ding appointing Shu Qingchen and a group of talented young people to reform, the citizens of the Northwest felt incomparably peaceful and happy under the protection of the Prince Ding mansion. If they had been worried about their fate after breaking off relations with the Da Chu state, most of them would not be willing to return to the Da Chu state now. In the hearts of the citizens, Prince Ding and Princess Ding, who could let them live a peaceful and worry-free life, were the ones they truly supported. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed. Inside the Prince Ding mansion, a small child wearing an ink-colored brocade robe with a dragon pattern embroidered with silver threads was walking slowly along the corridor. Although his white and tender little face tried to make a solemn expression, it was still so adorable that people could not help but want to reach out and pinch him. The child had a pair of beautiful eyes that were like black pearls. Coupled with his solemn expression that was like a little adult's, it was as exquisite as snow and jade. At such a young age, he already revealed a stunning elegance and handsomeness. The people following behind him were all frowning as they looked at the little master in front of them. They looked like they wanted to persuade him but did not dare to open their mouths. As if he felt the resentment behind him, the child turned his head and glanced at the people following behind him. He snorted disdainfully and said, "This prince said that you don't need to follow me." What? This prince's words are not effective. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines and couldn't help but cry in their hearts. "Little prince, where did you learn this tone of voice from? It's very scary, isn't it?" "That. Prince, the prince instructed you to copy the biography of Prince Ding 10 times. The prince wants to check it when he comes back." The attendant quickly reminded him. The child squinted his round eyes and said calmly, "I understand. You can leave now. I'm going to pay my respects to my mother." Everyone looked at each other, not knowing how to deal with this matter. It was impossible to not let the little prince pay respects to the princess. No one could say that the little prince was filial to his mother. But if they let the little prince go, the little prince would most likely refuse to do the homework that the prince had given them. When the prince came back, they would be the unlucky ones. The little prince snorted heavily. He knew that his lord father did not have good intentions in arranging so many people by his side. Mother was his. How could that old man snatch her away just because he wanted to? The little prince glanced disdainfully at the attendants. He flung his sleeves and walked briskly towards his mother. In the study, Yi Li sat behind the desk and seriously looked at the booklet that had just been presented to her. 5 years of time did not leave too many traces on her body. Compared to 5 years ago, she was now in her 20s. The experience of being in a position of power made her more dazzling and graceful. Yi Li closed the booklet in her hands and looked up at Qin Feng, who was standing in front of her. She asked, "The changes and reorganization of the Mohist army are almost complete. How is Qi Lin?" Qin Feng smiled and said, "Princess consort, please do not worry. Now, Qi Lin has a total of 2,000 soldiers under his command. Every one of them is the best of the best, carefully selected and cultivated." Yi Li smiled and said, "Elites are not made just by words. The Northwest has been too peaceful these past few years. The Mohist army has just been reorganized. In the past few years, there have been many new soldiers who have never been on the battlefield. I'm just afraid that the strength of the Mohist army will decrease instead of increase." Qin Feng smiled and said, "Princess consort worries too much. Even though the new soldiers have never been on the battlefield, the prince and the generals have been strictly trained and have never slacked off. As for the problem of experience, they will be able to adapt after going on the battlefield once or twice." Yi Li nodded and looked at Qin Feng. Qin Feng had followed Yi Li for many years and had some understanding of the changes in Yi Li's expressions. He asked curiously, "Does Princess Consort have any ideas?" Yi Li tapped her index finger and nodded. She said in a low voice, "I do have some ideas, but whether they can be implemented or not is debatable." Qin Feng respectfully said, "This subordinate is willing to hear the details." Chapter 497. Yi Li pursed her lips into a smile and said, "To prevent the soldiers from not being on the battlefield for too long and becoming rusty. How about, we have a military drill?" "Military drill?" Qin Feng said with some curiosity. Although it sounded very strange, he could understand the meaning of Princess Consort's words from her words. In reality, every country had some drills when training their armies. For example, navy drills, troop formations, and various military drills. But Qin Feng felt that Wang Fei would give a more interesting method. Yi Li nodded. She smiled as she thought, "That's right. Qin Feng, go back and see which place in the Northwest is suitable for this kind of large-scale drill." Qin Feng raised an eyebrow. "Do you need a big place?" The newly built Mohist army drill 50 li outside of Li City should be big enough. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "I don't want that kind of place, I want a battlefield." "Battlefield?" Qin Feng was shocked. "Wang Fei's meaning is?" Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, the terrain is complex and the territory is vast. It is a place that can support a true battle. I want a joint drill with many different types of soldiers. Not just the Mohist army, but also the Black Cloud cavalry. Even Qi Lin must participate." Qin Feng imagined the scene that Yi Li described in his mind and suddenly felt his blood boil. He immediately responded in a clear voice, "Wang Fei, don't worry. This subordinate will definitely find a suitable place." Yi Li nodded in satisfaction and said, "Very good. Go and do your work. I will discuss this matter with the prince later. Before this, keep it a secret." This subordinate obeys. Qin Feng's handsome face was filled with an excited smile. He really had been too idle these past few years. Even though the drill was not a true battlefield, Qin Feng felt it was very interesting to hear Wang Fei's words. "Mu Fei." There was the sound of a child's light footsteps and a soft call from outside the door. The smile on Yi Li's face became even gentler. As soon as she raised her head, she saw her baby walk in with an aggrieved expression, looking at her pitifully. Qin Feng, who was standing at the side, twitched his mouth and retreated to the side. "Greetings, Your Highness." Mo Xiaobao noticed that there were outsiders in the study and his aggrieved expression froze. Yi Li smiled and said, "Baby, what's wrong?" Mo Xiaobao directly ignored Qin Feng, turned around the large desk, and threw himself into Yi Li's arms. His little face rubbed against Yi Li's body. "Mu Fei. I'm not called Bao Bao. Chenna has grown up." Yi Li reached out to pick up Mo Xiaobao and let him sit in her embrace. She raised her hand to tap his little head and said with a smile, "Okay, sorry, Mu Fei forgot again." Why did Chenna come to find Mu Fei? It had to be said, The ability to imperceptibly influence others was very scary. When Mo Xiaobao was just born, Yi Li still remembered to call him Mo Xiaobao's full name in the future. Otherwise, if his nickname was spread too widely, her son would feel embarrassed. It was a pity that before Mo Xiaobao had the ability to protest, Mo Xiaoyao had spread his son's nickname to the entire Mohist army. If it wasn't for the fact that Mo Xiaobao's name had caused quite a stir, everyone would have thought that the Prince Ding Mansion's Shizi was named Mo Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao rubbed against his mother's arms in satisfaction, smelling the faint fragrance on his mother's body. He blinked his large eyes and said, "This child has come to accompany Nyang Qin for lunch." Yi Li looked outside to see the color of the sky and then turned her head to look at Qin Feng. Qin Feng lowered his head and coughed lightly. Resisting the urge to laugh, he said, replying to Wang Fei, "It's just past Sishi." Yi Li looked down at Mo Xiaobao and raised her eyebrows. "What bad thing did you do?" Mo Xiaobao pouted his small mouth and pitifully raised his small hand in front of Yi Li. "Nyang Qin, this child's hand hurts." Yi Li was helpless. "What did your Fuwang ask you to do?" Fuwang asked this child to copy Prince Ding's biography 10 times. "If I don't finish it, I'm not allowed to eat lunch." Woo-woo. Chen Er's hand is going to be crippled. The biography of Prince Ding in the history of Chu has a total of 8 chapters. Each chapter has at least 2,000 to 3,000 words. In total, there are nearly 20,000 words. If he wrote it 10 times, it would be more than 200,000 words. Mo Xiaobao trembled and tightly held on to his mother. Even if he was beaten to death, he can't write it. His hand will be crippled. So he took advantage of Fu Wang's absence to run to his mother for help. The last sentence of not being allowed to eat lunch was definitely added by him. Yi Li, who knew her son's moral character, helplessly smiled. However, she still had some complaints about Mo Xiaoyao punishing her son to copy so many things. Mo Xiaobao was not yet 5 years old, he couldn't even hold a brush steadily. More than 200,000 words, even an ordinary person would need a lot of time to copy, let alone a child who couldn't even recognize all the words. After thinking about it, Yi Li said, "Then change it to copying Ding Mingwang's biography." Ding Mingwang was the first-generation Prince Ding, Mo Lan Yun, who was posthumously titled Ming. Seeing the joy in Mo Xiaobao's eyes, Yi Li unhurriedly added, "After you finish writing, you must be able to read all the words. When your father comes back, go and read it in front of him. Do you understand?" Mo Xiaobao blinked his eyes, but when he saw the unchanging expression in his mother's eyes, he could only reluctantly agree. From 8 chapters 10 times to 1 chapter 1 time, it was already good enough. He obediently nestled into Yi Li's arms. This child understands. Good child. Yi Li rubbed her son's small head and smiled. Mo Xiaobao immediately smiled and nodded, saying, "This child is the most obedient, this child loves mother the most." Yi Li lowered her head and kissed his forehead. She smiled and said, "Mother also loves Chenna the most." Standing to the side and watching the interaction between mother and son, Qin Feng inwardly shook his head. "Little Shizi, every time the prince wasn't here, you would pretend to be pitiful and get close to Wang Fei. When the prince came back, you would be chased away and punished again. Was there any meaning? The prince has returned." The sound of a maid greeting came from outside the door. Qin Feng glanced at little Shizi, who was still in Wang Fei's arms, and quickly left. "Wang Fei, subordinate will leave first." Yi Li nodded and said, "Go." Mo Xiaoyao stepped into the room and saw his son sitting in Yi Li's arms like a well-behaved child. He unconsciously frowned. She was dressed in white and had a head of snow-white silver hair, which made her seem cold and aloof. However, when he saw his wife sitting behind the desk, his slightly cold eyes became a little warmer. "Lily, what are you talking about?" Yi Li patted Mo Xiaobao and raised her head with a smile, replying, "Nothing, Chenna just came to greet me." Mo Xiaobao unwillingly came down from his mother's arms and walked forward to greet his father. "This son greets Fuwang." Mo Xiaoyao looked down at him for a moment and then bent down to pick him up so he was at eye level. "Come to greet your mother?" Xiaobao is really filial. Fuwang is very gratified. Being held in his father's arms, Mo Xiaobao immediately struggled. But with his little strength, he couldn't break free from Mo Xiaoyao's hands. Mo Xiaoyao held him in his arms. Mo Xiaobao used all his strength and his face was red, but he couldn't move those iron-like arms. Chen what's wrong? With Mo Xiaoyao blocking her view, Yi Li didn't see her son's struggle. She just found it strange that her son, who always liked to jump into her arms, was blushing in Mo Xiaoyao's arms. Mo Xiaoyao looked lovingly at his son and said with a smile, "It seems that Xiaobao already knows how to be shy. He has grown up." Chapter 498. Yi Li raised an eyebrow. Was it like this? Mo Xiaobao knew that he could not shake his father's power and could only pretend to be shy as he lay in his father's arms, confirming Mo Xiaoyao's words. Mo Xiaoyao carried Mo Xiaobao and sat down beside Yi Li. Yi Li got up and poured a cup of tea for him, asking, "How is the army camp outside the city?" Mo Xiaoyao took a sip of the tea, saying, "There are no problems, the hard work of these years has not been wasted. I saw Qin Feng leave in a hurry. Did Li Li tell him something?" Yi Li nodded, telling Mo Xiaoyao the idea she had told Qin Feng. Mo Xiaoyao was very interested in this idea. Military drill? Li Li's ideas are always very strange. Compared to those exercises that are just for show, this idea is indeed much more interesting. Yi Li nodded with a smile. This method doesn't just test the normal soldiers, it also tests the commanding generals. Didn't we specially select a group of young generals to teach them these few years? We need to see how effective it is. If we get a group of armchair commanders, it's better to just throw them into the battlefield and kill them. Mo Xiaoyao nodded in agreement, saying, "This is very good. Li Li, write down the plan and I'll look at it later, then let people prepare it. But since it's a war between two armies, there will definitely be a supreme commander. Does Li Li have any ideas in mind? Who will lead the army?" Yi Li nodded with a smile, saying, "I've thought about it. How about you personally lead one army?" Mo Xiaoyao was startled, putting down the teacup and looking at Yi Li, asking, "Then what about the other side?" Yi Li pursed her lips into a smile, saying, "I'll lead the other side. General Zhong and General Lu are both old generals, they will be the observers and judges. Also, it's just in case." Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment, then nodded in agreement with Yi Li's plan, saying, "Good, they all say that Li Li is a genius, I also want to see how Li leads the army." Hearing this, Yi Li could only helplessly smile. In terms of talent, who in the world could compare to Mo Xiaoyao? Not to mention a dabbler like her. But she would not arrange a one-sided drill, at least, it would be interesting if both sides were balanced, right? Mo Xiaobao sat in his father's arms, listening to his father and mother talking. Even though he did not understand, he still quietly listened. From time to time, he blinked his big eyes. In Yi Li's eyes, he was extremely adorable. She reached out to Mo Xiaoyao and said, "Give me Chen Er." Mo Xiaobao was overjoyed, quickly reaching out his small hands to his mother. Mo Xiaoyao slightly moved to the side, letting Mo Xiaobao be further away from his mother. He said to Yi Li, "He's already 5 years old, he's not light, be careful not to tire you. Moreover, it's not good for a child to always be carried by others. I haven't been carried by anyone since I was 2 years old." Yi Li could only helplessly look at her son. Mo Xiaobao gritted his teeth in his heart. Mo Xiaoyao casually said, "When we returned to the city, we went outside the city to pay a visit to Mr. Qingyun. Mr. Qingyun said that Mo Xiaobao is already 5 years old, he can be enlightened." Yi Li blinked, somewhat puzzled. Didn't we enlighten Chen Er already? Even though her own child was not yet 5 years old, but he had already learned most of the children's books in the 1,000-character classic. In Yi Li's previous life, when she was 5 years old, she was still playing games with the teacher in kindergarten and learning A and B. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at his son's well-intentioned smile, but Mo Xiaobao only felt a cold wind blowing over his head. "Li, you're a girl, so the Shu family's teachings were not strict. But you can ask the young masters of the Shu family, which one of them didn't learn to read at the age of 2 or 3, and should have started formal school at the age of 4 or 5. If not, how could the people of the Shu family all pass the imperial examinations before the age of 20? You have to know, It's already very rare for an ordinary person to pass the imperial examinations at the age of 24 or 25. Since Xiaobao is the heir of the Prince Ding mansion, he will have to bear more responsibilities in the future than others. If we're too lenient with him, we'll be harming him. Yi Li was speechless. Was this considered not letting the child lose at the starting line? Who said that the children in her previous life and modern life had it hard? The children of the Shu family were the ones who really had it hard. When Mo Xiaoyao mentioned it, Yi Li also realized that the descendants of the Shu family all passed the imperial examinations before the age of 20. For example, the eldest brother, Shu Qingchen, passed the imperial examinations at the age of 14. Didn't he have to start learning at the age of 2 or 3? Looking at her son with some reluctance, Yi Li sighed softly and said, I only hope that Chenna can have a happy and worry-free childhood. Childhood? What was that? Why did his son have something he didn't have? Mo Xiaoyao's heart was filled with jealousy, but he still smiled gently. In today's world, it's better for Xiaobao to be mature early than for him to be ignorant when we can't protect him in the future, isn't it? Moreover, with Master Qingyun personally teaching him, are you still worried? Although Master Qingyun is strict with his children and grandchildren, he dotes on Xiaobao the most. Are you still afraid that he'll be tired? Yi Li thought about it and agreed. If Master Qingyun was the second most doted on Xiaobao in the whole Northwest, no one would dare to be the first. Even Master Qingyun's great-grandson, Shu Qingze, and Qin Zheng's 4-year-old son, Shu Zhirue, had to stand aside. Well, Chen when you go to Taigong, you have to be obedient, okay? Mother will go to see you every other day, okay? Xiaobao listlessly crawled in Mo Xiaoyao's arms, and in his heart, he despised his despicable father. Don't you just want to drive me out? Humph. When this young master grows up, let's see what you old man can use to snatch mother from me. Mother. Woo-woo, you have to wait for Chen to grow up. Chen will definitely snatch you back. Xiaobao took his usual luggage and sadly went to Taigong, who doted on him the most. Although he lost the battle to fight for his mother again, Xiaobao firmly believed that it was because he was still too young and his father used force to bully him. Moreover, he secretly made up his mind that since the old man shamelessly bullied the young, then when he grew up, he wouldn't mind bullying the old man as the young. After sending Xiaobao to the newly built Lishan Academy not far from Li City, Yi Li didn't feel good when she saw her son standing next to Master Qingyun and looking at her pitifully. Speaking of which, as a mother, she was really too irresponsible. Fortunately, Xiaobao was close to her since he was young. Yi Li thought about it. In the future, it would be best to come and see her son every day and then make some pastries that he liked to eat and send them over. When Xiaobao was a little older and didn't have to worry about going back and forth every day, she would let him go back to the Prince Ding mansion every day. It wasn't good for a child to not see his parents all the time. Li, didn't you say that you would come and see Xiaobao every other day? Master Qingyun will teach him well, don't worry. Mo Xiaoyao hugged Yi Li and comforted her softly. I will double the number of shadow guards in Lishan Academy and Qilin has a team stationed nearby. You don't have to worry about Xiaobao's safety. Yi Li sighed helplessly. She really didn't understand why Mo Xiaoyao was so against Xiaobao. Every time he saw Xiaobao sticking to her side, he would definitely torment the child. Although she knew that Mo Xiaoyao knew his limits and wouldn't really hurt Xiaobao, Yi Li was still speechless when she saw Xiaobao's red and pitiful face every time he was bullied. Xiaoyao, do you really hate Chenna that much? Chapter 499. Mo Xiaoyao looked innocently at Yi Li and smiled. Xiaobao is my son, how could I dislike him? Li, I'm doing this for the sake of Xiaobao's future. Everyone says that a strict teacher produces a brilliant disciple, and a good rod produces a filial son. If you don't be strict with Xiaobao, when he grows up to be like the brothers Mo Jingqi and Mo Jingli, won't you be sad to death? Yi Li looked at him speechlessly. After a while, she said, Prince Xiaobao grew up being played by father and big brother. Mo Xiaoyao smiled but didn't say anything. His father was so busy in the past that he didn't have the time to care about them. Big brother was really strict with him. In comparison, Mo Xiaoyao didn't think that he was too strict with Xiao Bao. Compared to when I was 5 years old and had to wake up before the sun rose to practice martial arts, Xiao Bao, you should be satisfied. I really am a loving father. With this comparison, Prince Ding felt that he was very loving to his son and that it was Li Li who spoiled him too much that she had a problem with it. It was wrong for parents to spoil their children. The two walked down the mountain hand in hand and bumped into Shu Qingchen, who was coming up from the bottom of the mountain. Young Master Qing Chen, who was nearing his prime, was dressed in a white robe. Compared to before, he looked more mature and elegant. Although eldest aunt already had a grandson in the past few years, she was even more anxious about Big Brother's marriage. However, Big Brother didn't seem to care at all. She had never heard of him looking at any girl differently. It was normal for him to be unwilling to get married early. In the Shu family, other than Shu Qingze who had been engaged since young, the others hadn't married yet. However, it was strange for him to be completely unmoved. Sometimes, even Yi Li thought that her cousin, who was exceptionally outstanding in all aspects, was preparing to become an immortal. Big Brother, you're here to pay respects to grandfather? Yi Li greeted first. Shu Qingchen looked at the two of them holding hands, and a teasing smile appeared on her lips. Unfortunately, Mo Xiaoyao's skin was thicker than he had imagined. He held Yi Li's hand without changing his expression. Shu Qingchen shook his head helplessly. He raised his hand and waved a purple gold scroll with complicated patterns on it. He said, "There is a matter. I heard that the prince and Wang Fei are not preparing to return to the city in the next 2 days, so I have to come personally. Fortunately, we met here." Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao suspiciously. How come she didn't know that they wouldn't be returning to the city for the next 2 days? Mo Xiaoyao's expression did not change as he looked at the booklet in Shu Qingchen's hand. "From Nanjiao? How did you know?" Yi Li asked curiously. Mo Xiaoyao pointed at the flourishing patterns on the booklet. "That is the pattern used by the Nanjiao Imperial House." Yi Li frowned as she thought back. She seemed to have seen this pattern in Nanjiao before. She couldn't help but feel ashamed of her ignorance. Yi Li took the booklet and asked, "Is Big Brother coming down the mountain with us or going to pay respects to grandfather first?" Shu Qingchen shook his head and sighed. "I just saw grandfather yesterday. The old man is angry and doesn't want to see me. Let's go down the mountain together." Yi Li was slightly shocked. Big Brother was the most outstanding member of the Shu family. Supposedly, he was grandfather's favorite grandson. How could grandfather be so angry that he was unwilling to see him? Mo Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow and chuckled. It's probably because eldest young Master Shu is too picky about marriage and has caused the heavens to be angry. Even Mr. Qingyun, with his good upbringing, can't stand it. Shu Qingchen glanced coolly at Mo Xiaoyao. Speaking of angering the heavens, was there anyone more outrageous than Prince Ding? He didn't do what he should, but insisted on doing what he shouldn't. It was one thing to throw his son to grandfather, but he actually wanted to sneak away with Li Er. If he hadn't gotten the news quickly, a certain person would have taken Li Er to God knows where to roam. Speaking of which, it's time for Big Brother to get married. Eldest aunt has told me many times. It's a pity that Big Brother doesn't like the young ladies of the Northwest. Who knows how many young ladies' hearts have been broken? Hey! As Yi Li joked, she casually flipped open the purple gold booklet. She couldn't help but let out a sound of surprise. "What's wrong?" Mo Xiaoyao asked with concern. Yi Li waved the booklet and glanced at Shu Qingchen. "Princess Anxi is getting married. She's invited us to attend the wedding in Nanjiao." Mo Xiaoyao wasn't surprised. Princess Anxi is already 24 years old. Even in Nanjiang, she should have gotten married long ago. What's so strange about it? Yi Li nodded in agreement. Ever since Princess Anxi left after staying in Glass City for a few days 5 years ago, Yi Li knew that there was no hope for her and Shu Qingchen. Yi Li still remembered that day when she personally sent Princess Anxi out of the city. Looking at Princess Anxi's back as she left, even she couldn't help but want to beat Shu Qingchen up. But in the end, she also understood that she couldn't blame Shu Qingchen. When it came to matters of the heart, it was always up to people to decide. Mo Xiaoyao took the booklet and flipped through it. As expected, it was a letter of credence from Nanjiao. It's still early. The wedding date is set for July. If the journey is fast, we can still make it in early July. After reading it, he was no longer interested. He casually returned the booklet to Shu Qingchen and smiled. I'll have to trouble Big Brother to take care of these matters. Li, a few days ago, Qingbai and Qingyang wrote a letter saying that the wheat in the north is growing exceptionally well this year. Right now is the time for the ears to bloom. Why don't we go take a look? Yi Li finally understood. No wonder Big Brother said that if he came late, he wouldn't be able to find her. It turned out that Mo Xiaoyao had sent Xiaobao to grandfather's place because he wanted to take her out with him. Shu Qingchen closed the booklet and looked calmly at Mo Xiaoyao. Prince, I'm afraid you won't be able to go far in the short term. Why? Mo Xiaoyao was displeased. His snow-white hair fluttered in the breeze. I have worked hard these few years. It wasn't easy to raise Mo Xiaobao. It wasn't easy to settle the matters in the northwest. Can't I rest? Hearing this, Yi Li and Shu Qingchen both looked at him with disdain. He actually had the nerve to say that he raised Mo Xiaobao. If he didn't torment Mo Xiaobao from time to time, it would have been easier for him to grow up. Shu Qingchen smiled calmly. Reporting to Prince, in another 10 days, it will be the first time the Northwest will hold a competition to select talents. We have prepared for 4 whole years. We can't possibly not have Prince present for the first time, right? At that time, it will give people the impression that we don't care about the world students. Or is it that Prince has the confidence to rush back from Fourth Brother's place in 10 days? In addition, even if this matter didn't happen, Father has already told me about the tax reform plan for the Northwest region that he submitted the day before yesterday. He wanted me to ask His Highness if there was anything wrong with it that caused His Highness to delay in replying. Also, the annual Glass City Chamber of Commerce is about to start. Merchants from various countries have already started to arrive in Glass City. Prince. Mo Xiaoyao looked dumbfounded at Shu Qingchen, who seemed to have endless things to say. He couldn't help but feel his teeth ache. He simply wanted to go up and grab Shu Qingchen's collar and shake him. Didn't I leave all the matters in the Northwest to you guys to handle? Why are there still so many things that I have to personally handle? Looking at Mo Xiaoyao's ashen face, Yi Li couldn't help but cover her mouth and secretly laugh. She gave Mo Xiaoyao a helpless look. It's not that I don't want to go out with you to play, but you don't have time to go out and play. In fact, the reason why there were so many things, there was definitely a part of it that Shu Qingchen did it on purpose. Perhaps he learned the lesson of riding a tiger and not being able to back down after so many years of the Shu family. Although the Shu family had Mo Xiaoyao's deep trust, they had always carefully avoided matters of power. Other than Shu Qingfeng, the other members of the Shu family never asked about the military affairs of the Mohist army. Although they relied heavily on Shu Hongyang, Shu Hongyu, and Shu Qingchen, they rarely participated in matters that would make them famous. Otherwise, they would use Mo Xiaoyao as a cover and push all the credit and reputation to Prince Mo Xiaoyao. Shu Hongyu even asked Master Qingyun to set a new family rule. In the future, the children of the Shu family who became officials would have to retire at the age of 58. In order to prevent Li's-Han Academy from being the only one in power, Shu Hongyang had done his best to support and build several academies in the Northwest. This changed the situation of the Northwest, where there wasn't a single good academy. The Shu family's actions expressed their attitude. Yi Li could only sigh softly in her heart and accept their kindness. Chapter 500. If Prince really feels tired, why don't you rest for a few days when you go to Nanjiao? In any case, Prince won't have anything to do in Nanjiao. When Shu Qingchen finally finished speaking, she glanced at Mo Xiaoyao's indignant expression before adding leisurely, "Wife, it's not that your husband isn't considerate and doesn't want to accompany you to relax. It's just that Eldest brother-in-law is too fierce. Wife, you have to make a decision for your husband. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li plaintively. Yi Li looked amusedly at Mo Xiaoyao, who didn't look old at all with his snow-white hair. He was clearly a man in his early 30s, but he looked younger than when they first met. Okay, husband, don't be sad. Let's go to Nanjiao and play for a few more days. Leave everything to eldest brother and the others. Hearing this, Mo Xiaoyao glanced provocatively at Xu Qingchen. Xu Qingchen pretended not to see. She looked up at the sky and said indifferently, Li, it's okay to spoil your husband, but spoiling him too much will easily damage your brain. Eldest brother, your maternal grandfather, and uncle will all be distressed. If others don't know, they'll think you gave birth to twins. Listen to eldest brother, this husband should be wise and powerful. Yi Li looked left and right. She wisely decided not to speak. In this world, it wasn't only men who found it difficult to be sandwiched between their wife and mother. It was also difficult for women to be sandwiched between their husband and eldest brother. She smiled gently, eldest brother and prince, take your time to chat. I seem to see that Qin Feng has something to say to me. After speaking, she didn't look at the two's expressions and walked down the mountain first. Behind her, Xu Qingchen's smile was like a spring breeze. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his brows in deep thought. Could it be that Li really did like Ai's wise and powerful appearance, so she left so quickly? Turning back to glance at a certain person who was like a banished immortal, Prince Ding sneered maliciously in his heart. Destroying the relationship between I and Li? If I don't marry you off as soon as possible, I will be sorry for you and your family. Young Master Qing Chen, who was smiling elegantly, shuddered for no reason. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at the cloudless sky. Although there was still some time before Princess Anche's wedding, they didn't have much time to prepare. Just as Xu Qingchen had said, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao still had a lot of things to deal with. Moreover, this trip to Nanjiang would take at least a month. Prince Ding and Princess Consort were not around at the same time, so there were more things that needed to be accounted for. As expected, the moment he returned to the residence, Mo Xiaoyao was invited to the study by Xu Hongyu, who had been waiting for him. She smiled as she watched Mo Xiaoyao leave the study. When Yi Li returned to her courtyard, she found that there was someone waiting for her. Eldest aunt, why are you here? Is something the matter? Seeing Yi Li come in, Madame Xu hurriedly got up. Yi Li went over to help Madame Xu sit down and said with a smile, Aunt, if you have something to say, just sit down. There are no outsiders. Why are you being so polite with me? Did I disturb you by coming here? Madame Xu asked worriedly. Although she was a woman of the inner courtyard, Madame Xu knew that her niece, as Princess Ding, was different from other women of the inner courtyard and even other princess consorts. However, in the hearts of the people in the northwest, Princess Ding's name was almost as famous as Prince Ding's. For example, Prince Ding's subordinates and even the generals of the Mohist army were all obedient to Yi Li. Yi Li said with a smile, Aunt, don't say that. I usually help out and don't have time to visit you. Eldest aunt and second aunt also don't come to visit me. I know that eldest aunt is spending all your time on my three brothers and doesn't care about me. Madame Xu couldn't help but laugh at Yi Li's teasing, but soon her eyebrows were dyed with worry again. She smiled bitterly and said helplessly, Your second aunt is really satisfied now that she has a grandson. She spends all her time on Rui. But I'm really worried all day long. Yi Li understood and asked softly, Is it because of eldest brother's matter? Who else could it be other than him? Madame Xu sighed. In the blink of an eye, Qing Chen is almost 30 years old, but he doesn't even have a girl he likes. Your eldest brother has never made anyone worry about him since he was young, but he is the most worrisome person in this matter. If I had known this, I would have followed your second uncle and arranged a child marriage for him. Regardless of whether it's good or bad, he should at least get me a wife. Yi Li also sighed. Big brother's matter was indeed worrying. Logically speaking, the Xu family was definitely an open-minded family. Except for Xu Qingze, who was engaged to Qin Zheng when he was young, the other brothers didn't get engaged early. Naturally, this was so that they could carefully choose a daughter-in-law, lest their son marry a wife he didn't like or wasn't virtuous. Even Shu Qingchen, who was over 20 years old and hadn't married, the Shu family didn't force him. But now that he was about to turn 30, it was no wonder that Madame Shu was anxious. Eldest brother's standards are too high. There's nothing we can do if he doesn't like ordinary girls. Yi Li sighed softly. Not to mention Shu Qingchen himself, even Yi Li felt that there weren't many girls who could match up to her eldest brother. The only one who was somewhat interesting was Princess Anshi, but her eldest brother didn't like her. High standards. Does he want to marry a fairy? Madame Shu couldn't help but wipe her tears and complain angrily. Does he think he's so great just because people call him the first young master in the world? Does he think that all the women in the world can't enter his eyes? He's not even an ordinary person with 2 eyes and 1 nose. Look at him, not to mention that he's already so old. In another 2 years, which girl from a good family would be willing to marry someone who's so much older than her? Because he set a bad example, now your second uncles Qingfeng, Qingbai, and Qingyang are all refusing to get married. It's all his fault as the eldest brother. Yi Li sighed in her heart. Her eldest brother was like that. Even if he was 40, he wouldn't lack girls who would rush to marry him, let alone 30. Madame Shu was furious. Yi Li had to comfort her in a soft voice, saying, "Eldest aunt, don't be angry with my eldest brother. He's the most filial. If he knew that you were so sad, he would be sad too. No one can be sure about fate. Maybe he'll meet a girl tomorrow and chase after her to marry him." Although the possibility was almost zero. Yi Li couldn't imagine Shu Qingchen chasing after a girl to please. "Eldest aunt, do you have any plans?" Yi Li knew that Madame Shu wouldn't come here to complain to her. Madame Shu nodded and said firmly, "I can't let him fool around anymore. Your second aunt plans to find a wife for Qingfeng. I've also found 2 girls for him. Think of a way for me to make him go back and meet those girls. He's so cunning. As soon as I mentioned it to him, he ran away. He's so busy today and so busy tomorrow. I don't go out often, so how can I catch him?" Yi Li was suddenly happy. So eldest aunt wanted to set up a blind date for her eldest brother but couldn't find anyone? Tilting her head and thinking, Yi Li nodded firmly and said, "Don't worry, eldest aunt. I'll let my eldest brother go back when the time comes." Madame Shu was overjoyed. "Then I'll have to trouble you." Chapter 501. Yi Li said with a smile, "Eldest aunt, what trouble is there? Leah also wants to have a sister-in-law as soon as possible." As expected, Lady Shu acted quickly. She was eager to marry a daughter-in-law. In less than 2 days, she brought a letter to Yi Li from the Shu Fu, saying that everything was ready and waiting for Shu Qingchen to return to find a daughter-in-law. Receiving Lady Shu's sincere letter, Yi Li smiled helplessly and could only get up to go find Shu Qingchen in the study. The front yard of the Prince Ding mansion had been divided into an office area by Yi Li. Other than the hall for receiving guests and the meeting room for meetings, there were also several study rooms of various sizes for the civil officials of the Prince Ding mansion to work. As soon as Yi Li stepped into the study, she saw Shu Qingchen sitting behind the desk, leisurely sipping tea as he flipped through the booklets in his hands. She couldn't help but sigh in admiration at her older brother's elegance. The title of the greatest young master in the world did not come out of nowhere. Even though he was working tirelessly in the study dealing with the complicated political affairs, Shu Qingchen looked elegant and otherworldly, as if he were a graceful young master reciting poetry. "Big brother." Yi Li stepped into the study and called out softly. Shu Qingchen put down the booklets and got up with a smile. "Leah, why have you come to Big Brother's place at this time?" Yi Li waved her hand and smiled. "Big Brother doesn't need to be so courteous with Leah. Sit down and talk." Shu Qingchen raised an eyebrow and slowly sat back down in his chair. He looked at Yi Li with a smile and waited for her to speak. Yi Li thought for a moment and asked, "How many days has it been since Big Brother returned to the Shu Fu?" Shu Qingchen was a quick-witted person. As soon as Yi Li spoke, he understood the purpose of Yi Li's visit. He smiled and asked, Did mother ask you to persuade me to go back to find a girl? Yi Li couldn't help but feel embarrassed. There was nothing wrong with these words, but for some reason, it was especially awkward coming from Shu Qingchen's mouth. Yi Li thought for a while and handed the letter from Madame Shu to Shu Qingchen. She smiled faintly and said, although Li shouldn't meddle in Big Brother's affairs, but Big Brother should at least give eldest aunt an explanation. Even if it can make her feel at ease, it's good. Big Brother, isn't it your habit to drag things out like this? You also made eldest aunt sad for no reason. Shu Qingchen read Madame Shu's letter, his handsome face tinged with helplessness and guilt. Yi Li looked at him and said softly, no matter what reason or thoughts Big Brother has, it's better to tell eldest aunt clearly. Li, it seems like first aunt, first uncle, and grandfather aren't unreasonable people. If Big Brother really has any thoughts, the elders won't really force Big Brother to marry. Big Brother also doesn't have to hide from first aunt like now, right? Shu Qingchen was stunned, and he smiled bitterly and helplessly. Li saw through it. Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled. Isn't it obvious? No matter how lazy Xiaoyao likes to be, he won't go so far as to push everything on Big Brother. He is still very clear about what's important and what's not. But Big Brother rarely returns to the Shu estate recently, isn't that right? Shu Qingchen put away the letter and sighed softly. He looked at Yi Li and said, Big Brother knows. He will return in a while. Yi Li blinked her eyes and looked at Shu Qingchen with a smile. She asked, do you need Li to accompany Big Brother back to boost his courage? Shu Qingchen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After sending Shu Qingchen off, Yi Li turned back to her study. When she entered, she saw Mo Xiaoyao leaning on the chair and reading a file with great interest. Hearing Yi Li's footsteps, Mo Xiaoyao hurriedly waved to her and said with a smile, Li, quickly come and take a look. Yi Li curiously walked forward. What are you looking at? She lowered her head and saw that it was a file that the Shadow Guard had presented to her. It was Shu Qingchen's life experiences. She lowered her head and glanced at Mo Xiaoyao. She raised her eyebrows and asked, you had someone investigate Big Brother? Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand and said, I'm also helping Li. Aren't the Shu family members worried about Shu Qingchen's marriage? Li's thoughts have been heavy these past 2 days because she's been thinking about him, right? Yi Li nodded and reluctantly accepted this explanation. She asked, what are you reading? Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and looked at Yi Li with some pity. Yi Li was startled. Could it be that something really happened to Big Brother? Li, you have to hold on. Mo Xiaoyao patted Yi Li's hand and said comfortingly, I think we really need to consider marrying your Big Brother off. What do you mean? Mo Xiaoyao waved the file in his hand and said, everything that young Master Qingchen has done in the past 20 years is written here. But there's never been any mention of what happened between him and that girl. There's not even the slightest mention of him being special to that girl. Yi Li narrowed her eyes and gritted her teeth. So you think Big Brother is gay? Mo Xiaoyao threw the file on the table and stretched elegantly. What else could it be? Young Master Qingchen will be 30 in 2 years. Would you believe it? In the past 30 years, young Master Qingchen hasn't even held a girl's hand. Yi Li tried to remain calm. You can say that Big Brother has high standards and doesn't like ordinary girls. Mo Xiaoyao looked up at the sky and rolled his eyes. It was obvious that he didn't believe Yi Li's self-comforting words. Yi Li pinched Mo Xiaoyao's perfect face and pulled it left and right. Don't always make Big Brother uncomfortable. If this kind of thing gets out, it won't be good for Big Brother. Mo Xiaoyao painfully pulled Yi Li's hands down and locked them in his palms. He rubbed his face where Yi Li was pulling and asked, does Li hate short sleeves? Yi Li glared fiercely at him. I don't hate it, but don't talk nonsense. Even if Big Brother is gay, he has to say it himself. Mo Xiaoyao nodded obediently. So Li, you also agree that Shu Qingchen is gay? Yi Li completely forgot that although the Shadow Guard's report didn't say that Shu Qingchen was special to any girl, it also didn't say that he was special to any man. She didn't know how Shu Qingchen convinced Lady Shu. After that, she didn't hear any rumors about the Shu family's eldest son going on blind dates in Glass City. But Shu Qingchen suddenly felt that every time his cousin looked at him, there was an indescribable strangeness and worry in her expression. If one were to ask what the most important event in the Northwest this year was, it would undoubtedly be the examination held in June. This was the first time in the 5 years since the Northwest became independent that it was holding an examination to select talents. Naturally, it attracted attention from all sides. At the same time, it once again expressed that the Northwest and Dhu State had nothing to do with each other. More importantly, the Northwest's examination this time wasn't limited to students in the Northwest. As long as the students from Dhu State and Xiling had real talent, the Northwest wouldn't reject them. Although the hot June wasn't a good time for the imperial examination, students from all over the Northwest, as well as some unrecognized talents from Dhu State and Xiling, had traveled thousands of miles to Glass City in an endless stream. Half a month later, the annual Glass City Chamber of Commerce would be held in Glass City. Merchants from all over the world would come from afar to bring their goods here to sell for a better price. Therefore, the people's enthusiasm for this city was as intense as the scorching summer. After 5 years, the current Glass City was no longer the same as it was in the past. Just the size of the city was at least twice as big as it was 5 years ago. The merchants on the streets and all kinds of dazzling goods were no worse than the Chu capital of Dhu State. From time to time, there would be people from the West who wore strange clothes, had very different hair colors, and had very different eyes from the people of the Northwest. Chapter 502. In Concentrated Fragrance Pavilion, Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li sat opposite each other in a room by the window. It was rare for them to be so relaxed as they drank tea and chatted. From time to time, they would look out the window and see the crowds on the streets. It was a scene of prosperity. Yi Li felt extremely gratified and satisfied when she saw this. This city was only as prosperous and peaceful as it was now because of their hard work over the past 5 years. Just like the Northwest, all of them had worked together to protect this land and the people of this land. Looking at the man sitting opposite her, Yi Li's heart was filled with tenderness and sweetness. They were not only husband and wife, but they also walked side by side and relied on each other. They had the same ideals and responsibilities. What is Li thinking about that makes you so happy? Mo Xiaoyao put down his teacup and looked tenderly at his wife, who was smiling warmly and contentedly. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Nothing, I just feel that the scene in front of me makes me feel very happy." Following Yi Li's gaze, they saw a young couple setting up a stall to sell cosmetics on the streets. Although they were dressed plainly, their faces were filled with happy smiles. A family of 3 holding hands with their child walked down the street. The child pointed at a hawker selling tanghulu and asked for tanghulu. An old man in his 60s walked slowly through the crowd with steady steps. There were also many young scholars passing by. Everyone's face seemed to be blooming with a strange radiance and smile. Mo Xiaoyao turned his head and said in a gentle but firm voice, "As long as we are here, they will always live this happy life." Yi Li nodded and said softly, "Actually, the people don't want much. As long as they can live a peaceful life, eat well and wear warm clothes, they will be deeply grateful to you." Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Isn't that right? Isn't the person the people of the Northwest most revered the eyes Li Li? If it wasn't for Li Li, how could they live such a good life?" It was Li who proposed the plan to open up the Northwest to foreign trade. It was also Li's idea to reclaim land in the northern plains to grow food. Mo Xiaoyao's words were not false flattery. Li had done too much for the Northwest and the Mohist army. All this time, Mo Xiaoyao had been very glad that he had married such an amazing wife. Yi Li pursed her lips and said with a smile, "Prince is praising me. I'm just moving my mouth and writing. The ones who really need to do it are others." Mo Xiaoyao smiled. Although there are many things that many people can do, no one has ever thought of it. Therefore, Mr. Li should still take the credit. "Prince, Princess, Yaoji requests an audience. Come in." Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said calmly. Yaoji pushed open the door and came in. 5 years had passed. The once #1 dancer of Chu had more mature charm and style. But after washing away her glamour, the present Yaoji was only wearing a plain dress and a jade hairpin. She had lost some of the pride of the #1 dancer and had more of a peaceful presence. Yi Li looked at the jasper lotus hairpin in Yaoji's hair. Her brows rose slightly and she said with a smile, "Long time no see, Yaoji seems to have become more beautiful." Yaoji smiled brightly and said, "Is Princess teasing me? How can I compare to Princess? You are the one who has become more elegant." Yi Li looked at her with a smile and said teasingly, "This jasper hairpin is very good. Ben Fei thinks it looks familiar." Yaoji couldn't help but uncomfortably touch the hairpin on her head and said, "This hairpin is very ordinary and the style is about the same." Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "That's not right. Don't look at how the jade hairpin is not of the highest quality. This jasper hairpin was passed down by the merchants of the western regions. There are only about 3 of them that can be found in the entire Li city. I kept a hibiscus hairpin and an orchid hairpin for the second madam of the Shu family. The last hairpin was begged by someone else." So, meeting Yi Li's teasing gaze, even Yaoji, who had seen countless people, couldn't help but blush. She hated the person who gave her the hairpin so much that her teeth itched. When that person gave her the hairpin, she naturally didn't want to accept it. But that person casually threw it away and said that he had no use for it and that he would throw it away if he didn't want it. She didn't think that this seemingly unremarkable hairpin had such a history. Yi Li saw that her face was getting redder and redder. She knew that she shouldn't tease her anymore. If she ruined her subordinate's marriage, she would be hated for the rest of her life. Using the words of her previous life, she would be kicked by a horse if she ruined her marriage. "All right, I won't tease you anymore. What's the matter?" Yi Li asked with a serious expression. Yaoji saw that Yi Li was giving her a way out and was happy to change the topic. She quickly said, "The list of problematic students who came for the exam is here. Should we arrest them now?" Yaoji respectfully presented a list of names. She took it and looked at it before handing it to Yi Li. "It seems that Enchanting and Mo Jingqi really think highly of us. They're taking advantage of every opportunity to send people to Li City. At least half of the people who came for the exam from Da Chu State and Xiling are their people." Yi Li thought for a moment and said to Yaoji, "Don't worry about them for now. We'll talk about it after the exam. I also want to see what kind of outstanding talents Genom of Gojosian and Mo Jingqi sent over. If a large number of nobles went missing before the exam, it would be easy to be discovered and cause a commotion. But after the exam, it would be different. Even if someone went missing, most of them would just take it as a failure and leave quietly." Yaoji agreed. She thought for a moment and said, "There's one more thing." Yaoji had already sent someone to report to Lord Mo Hua. "Since the prince and princess consort are here, I'll report to them first. I heard that the Chu capital is not very peaceful recently. The people in the restaurant downstairs heard this from the people who came from the Chu capital." Mo Xiaoyao frowned. "Did they say what happened?" Yaoji shook her head and said, "The other party is not a high-ranking official. They probably don't know much." Yi Li smiled. "It seems that our people in the Chu capital are not very useful." Mo Xiaoyao was not surprised and said indifferently, "Mo Jingqi's suspicions are so strong that it makes one's hair stand on end. In addition, he was fooled by Tan Jiji for nearly 10 years. Now, I'm afraid that he thinks of everyone as a traitor. Even if it means hurting himself, he will pull out all the people around him." Although the Prince Ding mansion still had some hidden pawns in the palace, they were hidden very deeply. Unless it was a matter of life and death for the Prince Ding mansion, they could not be easily used. It seems that everyone is tired of the peaceful days. "Li, go back and choose a suitable person to go back to the capital to help Leng Haoyu," Mo Xiaoyao said with a cold smile. Yi Li nodded. Yaoji, who was standing at the door, gritted her teeth and suddenly said, Princess consort, if you can trust me, Yaoji is willing to go to the capital." "You?" Yi Li frowned. "But with your identity and the danger of going to the capital, Have you really thought it through? Yaoji nodded firmly. Yaoji has thought it through. Although I have been in Glass City for the past few years, I have rarely shown my face. There are not many people in Glass City who can recognize me. In addition, Yaoji is no longer the Yaoji of the past. Not to mention other things, Yaoji still has the ability to protect myself. Yi Li looked at her determined appearance and sighed helplessly. You still can't let it go? Yaoji forced a smile and said, maybe I can let it go after going back this time. Yaoji will not delay the prince and princess consort's matter. I ask the prince and princess consort to agree. Chapter 503. Yi Li thought for a while and said, you go back first. I'll think about it and give you a reply. Yaoji thanked her and went out, closing the door behind her. In fact, Yaoji is a good candidate. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li and said, I'm afraid she still has feelings for Mu Yang. Yi Li frowned. I don't believe that she has completely let go of Mu Yang, but I also don't believe that she will betray the Prince Ding mansion for Mu Yang. Her child is still in the northwest. She will never betray the Prince Ding mansion for the sake of her child. And, even if she has feelings for Mu Yang, I'm afraid she hates the people of Marquis Mu Yang's mansion. Yaoji has a clear distinction between love and hate. Mo Xiaoyao felt a little strange. Since Yi Li knows that she still has feelings for Qin Feng, why do you agree for her to be with Qin Feng? What do you mean I agree for her to be with Qin Feng? Yi Li squinted. I just don't like to interfere with my subordinates' private lives. As long as it doesn't affect business, Qin Feng can like whoever he wants. Do I, as a princess, have to be a part-time matchmaker? Mo Xiaoyao was also not interested in his subordinates' private affairs. In that case, why don't you agree for Yaoji to go to the Chu capital? Yi Li sighed and shook her head, asking, am I too soft-hearted? Yi Li was no stranger to being a spy, so she naturally understood what a spy had to bear. After returning to the capital as Yaoji, the best way was to find a way to return to Mu Yang's side. In this way, whether Yaoji was killed by Mu Yang in the future, or when the two sides finally revealed their true intentions, Yaoji and Mu Yang were bound to stand on opposite sides of each other. It was too cruel for a man and a woman who once loved each other with a child, and it was also too cruel for Yaoji. Yi Li is a kind-hearted woman, Mo Xiaoyao said softly. When Yi Li didn't notice, he quietly raised the corner of his mouth. Cruel to Mu Yang? He did not feel it in the least. He only remembered that Marquis Mu Yang played a part in Li Li's death when she fell off the cliff. He didn't release Mu Yang to let him go back to Marquis Mu Yang to enjoy the happiness of family. Although the main course couldn't be served yet, they could just order appetizers. As for Yaoji, she was the one who asked for it. Besides, the Prince Ding mansion had saved her life. Shouldn't she return the favor? In Yi Li's study in the Prince Ding mansion, Yi Li looked calmly at Qin Feng, who was standing in front of her, and asked, what do you think about this? Qin Feng's expression was calm. He lowered his eyes slightly and said, everything will be decided by Wang Fei. When he heard Yi Li say that Yaoji had asked to go to the Chu capital to assist Leng Haoyu, Qin Feng's face was blank for a moment. But soon, he restrained his emotions and calmed down. Seeing Qin Feng's expression, Yi Li understood that Qin Feng really cared about Yaoji. In the past few years, Qin Feng followed Yi Li for the sake of Qi Lin's commander. Yi Li's trust in him was no less than Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, and the others. Although she didn't like to interfere in her subordinates' private affairs, Yi Li didn't want her subordinates to be troubled by love and even affect their business. She looked at Qin Feng and said, I haven't agreed to her request. If you don't want her to go, I can reject her request. Qin Feng was startled. He quickly shook his head and forced a smile. This is her own decision. This subordinate has no right to interfere. Seeing him like this, Yi Li could only sigh softly and said, Yaoji's trip will be very dangerous. I only hope that you won't regret it. Qin Feng was silent. Thank you, Wang Fei. Yi Li didn't try to persuade him anymore. She took a booklet from the side and wrote a few words on it. She handed it to Qin Feng and said, since it's like this, Send this to Yaoji. You can leave in 7 days. This subordinate obeys. After sending Yaoji off, Qin Feng didn't seem to be depressed. He still traveled between Qilin Station and Li City every day. It was just that he stayed in Qilin for a longer time. When the exam ended, Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li personally selected a group of talented and capable young people to fill the ranks of the officials in the Northwest. Then came the annual Yi Li's grandest Chamber of Commerce. But this year, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao didn't have time to participate in the grand event. They had to leave for Nanzhao to attend Princess Anche's wedding. In the group heading to Nanzhao, other than Mo Xiaoyao, Yi Li, Qin Feng, and Zhuo Jingfeng, there was also Xu Qingchen who had been shoved in at the last minute. The original plan was for Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao to go to Nanzhao and leave Xu Qingchen and Xu Hongyu to manage the Northwest affairs. But when they were about to leave, Xu Hongyu drove Xu Qingchen out and left behind General Lu Jingxian, who had originally been planning to go with them. No one knew what Mo Xiaoyao was thinking. He only thought for a moment before agreeing. And so, the group of people in the Northwest who were clearly above average in appearance leisurely went south to Nanzhao. In these years, Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li had been busy managing the Northwest and reorganizing the Mohist army. They hadn't stepped out of the Northwest in 5 years. But between the Northwest and Nanzhao was a large area of Da Chu State's land. So when the group left the Northwest, they were watched by the soldiers of Da Chu State. Although they didn't use force to intercept them, the feeling of being carefully and vigilantly watched wherever they went was still very unpleasant. One day, when the group passed by a small town to rest and eat, Mo Xiaoyao was finally annoyed by these people. This small town wasn't big. Even its name wasn't very eye-catching. But because it was close to the southwest border, a large number of soldiers were stationed there. It was considered the second or third line of defense in the southwest border and could directly support the southwest border. It was noon when Mo Xiaoyao and the group arrived at this small town. The weather was very hot. Seeing that they were only a little more than a day away from Shattered Snow Pass and there were still about 20 days until Princess Anche's wedding, they weren't in a hurry to travel. They planned to rest in the small town for the night and continue their journey the next morning. The group wasn't picky people. There weren't any luxurious restaurants or inns in this small town, so they randomly chose a decent one and booked the entire room. The innkeeper saw that they were all handsome men and beautiful women, and their clothes were also not ordinary. He naturally understood that they were not ordinary people and was very attentive to them. There weren't many people in Yi Li's group. Other than Yi Li, Mo Xiaoyao, Xu Qingchen, Feng San, and Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, there were only about 40 guards. Half of them were Black Cloud Cavalry, and the other half were Qin Feng's subordinates, Qi Lin. There was no need to mention the Black Cloud Cavalry. Qi Lin's people were all kinds of people. Even things like making tea and cooking rice were a piece of cake for them. Not only the innkeeper and the waiters, but even the chef of the inn couldn't be used. Yi Li and the group sat on the second floor and ate the exquisite delicacies served by the Qi Lin's people who were proficient in cooking. She ordered the others to go eat as well. Qin Feng, you really have a lot of capable people under you. Feng Zhiao praised as he ate the delicacies on the table that didn't lose to the taste of first-rate chefs. Qin Feng smiled faintly and said, "Young Master Feng San is overpraising me. It's just an insignificant skill." Feng Zhiao was envious and jealous. It was indeed an insignificant skill. However, to be able to study these insignificant skills so thoroughly, they were definitely experts among experts. Feng Zhiao had not only seen experts in cooking in Qilin, but there were also pedantic scholars who had nothing better to do. There were also talented people from all walks of life who were proficient in all kinds of crafts. There were even people who were tailors and embroideries. More importantly, these people also had terrifying strength. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.